quiet print shop holds its breath. It is Harlan, Iowa, 1961. The linotype is powered down, the pot is cold. On the stick tray, a single fresh slug waits anyway, letters raised and clean, spelling an obituary header no one has set. The foreman's thumb comes away grey with ink he didn't use. 3 states south and a few years later, a weather room in Marfa ticks past midnight. The teletype sleeps until it doesn't. Green bar paper feeds itself and prints a forecast word for word from 3 nights ago. Only the header stamp is new and the hour lands true. The observer draws a small circle around dust by 0210 and puts his thermos beside the barometer like proof. Far northwest, a hatchery in Forks goes dark. Gates are locked, raceways still. In the wet quiet, the mechanical click counter on the rail advances without a hand. 1 and then 11 more, as if a dozen silver bodies slid past in the black water. A bead forms on a dry sill and does not fall. Different towns, same hour. Small systems keeping their own rules. The paper will have its say, the numbers will sit where they land. Keep the volume low and listen for what repeats. Hey, glad you're here. I keep the lamp low and tell history carefully. Real places, real dates, steady detail. Before we start, do our 3 soft checks with me. Slow breath in, loosen your jaw, thumb on the table, click the quiet key. Drop your city and local time in the comments and add what you're listening on so our little night map can circle the world. New calm history horror arrives most nights. If this keeps you company, wait until the video ends to subscribe, then tap the bell so the next file finds you. After, tell me what details stayed with you. Let's begin. 3 quiet systems speak on their own. A cold linotype casts tomorrow's header. A desert teletype echoes a forecast 72 hours late and right on time. And a hatchery counter ticks 12 in dark water with the gates shut. The shop keeps its rules like a hymn. Ink lids on, pot cold, cabinets latched, floor swept toward the little brass drain. Lights taken down to 2 over the stones table and 1 green lamp at the foreman's desk. Every night begins the same way, and that sameness is part of what keeps the place honest. He's the foreman on press eve, 10 years on this line, careful hands, winter dry thumbs that hate loose type, and like a desk that gives yes or no. As usual, he walks the machines in the same quiet order, past the paper cutter with its red guard, past the case of M's and N's, past the lock-up bar where tomorrow's front page sits in chase under twine, and finally to the linotype that's been his since the county fair issue in '56. The pot is cold, so he tests it with the back of a knuckle, a quiet tap that would hiss if he were wrong. No steam, no amber glaze, no metallic tang, only the faint oil and dust of a room that has worked itself empty for the night. Satisfied for the moment, he clicks the toggle down just to feel the resistance and sees the lever settle exactly where it should. He checks the cam wheel and finds the chalk mark still resting on the same tooth he left it at supper. The keyboard rows lie like closed teeth, untouched. Outside, Main Street hums through the high window, a low neon throb from the hotel sign, the diner 2 blocks over, the muted whine of a passing car. Inside, he signs the lock sheet, initials, time, 1 neat line. He's halfway to the door when routine tugs his hand back. It's his last check, always, thumb across the stick tray to make sure it's clear before he heads home. But tonight, the thumb meets something that shouldn't be there, a cool square edge where there should be only flat metal. He stops, not frightened, just slowed, the way a mechanic pauses when the rhythm of a motor changes by half a beat. On the tray sits a single lead slug, centered like a paperweight, letters raised and sharp in the house obituary face. A common surname. An age that fits. The small word of, set in the distinctive, cut the shop uses for obits. No sweat line beneath it. No scattered type. No smell of hot metal. He checks the galley beneath for a spill or a dropped line that could explain it, but the galley is clean, dry, calm, untouched, except for faint scratches from last week's work. Slowly, he lifts the slug with 2 fingers. It's cool, the right way, solid in his palm. When he presses the edge onto a scrap sheet, it prints a perfect grey rectangle. He turns toward the keyboard out of habit. Every bar sits straight. No key is even half depressed. He crouches, eyes tracing the assembler, the spaceband box. Nothing seated, nothing gapped. The elevator rests like a locked door. The pot, when he tests it again, is still stone cold, and yet something has been cast. He checks the gas cock, it's crosswise, still off. He lifts the hood, smells only ink and dust. The foreman has spent too many years in this shop not to trust his senses. Machines tell you when they've worked. They leave heat, scent, residue. This one leaves nothing. For a moment, his instincts wrestle with his training. One side tells him, write it down and go home. The other warns, don't commit to paper what you can't explain. After a breath, he picks the first rule, because paper, at least, doesn't lie. He writes the line cleanly, each letter boxed in his square hand. Found slug on stick, obit HDR, press off, 2310. He notes the face and size, underlines pot cold once, and sets the pencil down. Then, with the steadiness of habit, he rolls a thin film of ink onto the form roller and makes a proof. The words appear crisp, measured, without error, exactly how they should. But it's not the perfection that bothers him. It's that the words read like tomorrow, not tonight. Trying to steady his thinking, he walks to the bulletin board and flips through yesterday's funeral notices. No match. He checks the hospital admits card. Nothing. The sheriff's blotter? Clean. He wipes the roller anyway because a clean tool steadies the hands. Next he draws a pencil box on the scrap sheet and sets the slug inside, then lays a steel ruler across it. If it shifts, he'll know. After that he makes a full circuit of the shop, moving drawer to drawer. Quads and spaces, untouched. Small caps, ordered. Italic sorts, still sleeping in their trays. No sign anyone's been through since supper. The air is so still that the dust over the cases doesn't stir. He listens. The building settles the way it always does, its old boards sighing as heat leaves the room. The sound is domestic, human. He catches himself smiling. The press room has moods, and this one, still watchful, feels like the pause after prayer. The stone's table gleams under its low light. The cutter blade gives off a dull reflection, just enough to paint his fingertips silver. He pours coffee from the thermos, not because he needs it, but because the pour itself marks time, a small proof that something ordinary still works as expected. Then again, the ordinary is exactly what's missing here. He studies the slug once more. The name, the age, the word of. He can't shake the feeling that it belongs to someone still breathing. He tries to reason with himself. Maybe a boy left it as a joke. Maybe a proof hand cast it last week and forgot. Maybe he's tired. But none of it fits. The weight feels new, the edges sharp, the surface too clean to be old stock. He sets the coffee aside and glances at the door. The deadbolt gleams unmoved. He looks back at the tray, the pencil box, the ruler, everything exactly where he placed it. The stillness feels deliberate. So he moves, just to make sure the room hasn't stopped around him. He walks past the presses, checks the inking rails, tips the oil can, sets it upright again. The sound of metal against metal calms him. He touches the twine on the front page chase. It's taut, unchanged. He scribbles a note on the pad tacked to the beam. Cutter. Blade clean, oil confilled, twine good. The act of writing helps. The scratch of the pencil reminds him he's still the one keeping order here. But then the proof catches his eye again. The age. It sits wrong, too familiar, too close to people he knows. He stares at it until the lines blur. The hospital list was short tonight. No one that age. He opens the little address box by the phone, finds the mortician's number, and rests his hand on the rotary dial. He doesn't move it. A man in a small town doesn't wake another man's house for what might be nothing. He covers the dial with his palm, breathes, and lets the quiet settle. Outside, through the high windows, the town looks like a photograph left too long in solution. Pale street, faint glare, shadows smudged. The diner light flicks off, then on again, then finally goes black. The hardware store clock across the way blinks its minute hand forward. He checks his wristwatch. They match. He writes another note beneath the first. Proof taken, C file. The letters come smaller this time, almost apologetic. He draws one careful underline and closes the book. Then he kneels beside the linotype once more, looking for anything that can explain the impossible. He checks beneath the keyboard, along the rails, inside the metal shavings pan. Nothing. The floor shows only old scratches and the faint shine of swept dust. He runs a finger over the spaceband box, no wedges displaced. The lift lever stays still, tight as ever. The keyboard cover slides smoothly, every bar sits flush. He replaces the cover, wipes the small print of his hand from the plate, and straightens. Slowly, he breathes in the heavy air, the one that lives only in a room after metal cools. The smell of lead, paper, and effort. It's the scent of work completed, of a machine at rest. He pours himself another coffee, this time sipping. Steam fogs the window. He writes a tiny 2318 in the mist with his finger, then watches it fade. He studies the proof again, measures the slug's width, compares it to the standard for obituary headers, and writes the figures on his pocket pad. Every number checks out, so the mystery remains. The machine's dead, but the type is born. He tries a new approach. If it isn't mechanical, maybe it's procedural. Maybe he forgot something. He goes through each motion in his head, how a line is set, how matrices drop, how the slug cools and ejects. None of those steps could happen cold. Not with the gas off. And still the slug exists. He taps the ruler once, a small metal chime, and listens. The sound ripples through the room and dies neatly. Nothing answers back. He thinks of calling the manager again, but what would he even say? That the press birthed a ghost of tomorrow's news? It sounds foolish even in his own head. Instead, he pulls the obituary file. He doesn't read the names. He looks at the layout, the patterns. The rhythm of the lines, the proof's shape matches perfectly. Same font, same small word, of, same hyphen spacing. Only the name differs and the date implied. He stands by the front window, hands in his pockets. Across the street, a cat moves along the curb, tail low. Somewhere far off, a door shuts. Nothing unusual. Finally, he decides to let the night keep its secret. He squares the pencil box, centers the ruler, and adds one tiny cross mark on the paper's corner, so he'll know if it shifts by morning. Then he writes a note for the day shift. Check first thing, no reset needed. He unlocks the alley door just enough to taste the cold air, a bite that clears his head. When he closes it again, the bolt slides smooth, familiar, final. He lingers once more in the middle of the room, the presses, the chases, the cabinets, all in their right places. Nothing leans, nothing hums. It's the quiet he's earned after decades of routine. He leaves the green lamp on. It paints the proof, the slug, and the ruler in a small circle of light. He tells himself it's only so he can find his way back in the morning, but part of him wants the room watched. witnessed by its own glow. He places the thermos beside the stamp pad again, right where it always lives. The sight of it, familiar and honest, steadies him. He looks at the type one last time and murmurs a thought he doesn't write down. Machines should rest when men do. He notes the hour in his pocketbook, tucks the pencil behind his ear, and heads out into the narrow alley. The air smells of frost and coal smoke. Behind him, the green lamp burns over a small piece of lead that no one set and no one called for, yet. And as the door shuts, the bolt falls with its usual clean note, the same sound it's made every night for 10 years. The same sound, but tonight it feels slightly louder, like punctuation on a line the paper hasn't printed yet. First, he does the thing a careful foreman does when a fact won't sit flat. He writes it again, slower. On the lock sheet, under the line he made at 23:10, he adds a second cleaner entry. Found. Obit slug on stick. Pot cold. Gas cop, crosswise. Keys, normal. 23:22. He boxes the time so the box will pull his eye later. Then, for good measure, he pulls a fresh scrap, inks the slug with a light touch, and prints one more proof beside the first. The second proof lands exactly the same. However steady his hand tries to be, the letters steady themselves more. Next, he builds a little ring of artifacts around the mystery. He tears a strip of masking tape, writes 23:24 on it, and tacks the two proofs to the cork. He slips the slug back into the pencil box, lays the steel ruler across at a diagonal this time, and draws a tiny pencil tick at one corner. If the slug creeps even a hair, he'll see it. Meanwhile, he numbers the steps he's taken in his pocket pad. 1, pot cold. 2, gas off. 3, keyboard quiet. 4, assembler empty. 5, proofs match. And then he adds a sixth line he's never written before. 6, words read like tomorrow. After that, he tries to let the room be ordinary again. He moves deliberately toward tasks that do not argue. He straightens the twine on the front page chase, resets the tape on the stone's table edge where it always curls, and counts tomorrow's church circulars in stacks of 10 stacks to 100, small paper clicks, a pencil dot on every 10th set. The clicks keep him from staring at the board. Still, as he sets the 9th stack down, his eyes pull to the cork, to the two proofs pinned side by side like twins who refuse to blink. By 23:41, he decides to test himself rather than the machine. He covers the proofs with a sheet of newsprint and recites the name and the age in his head until they lose their meaning. Then he lifts the paper and reads them fresh to see if they change. They do not. He tries the trick a second time and then a third. Each time, the letters hold. There is a comfort in that, but it does not quiet the small ache at the base of his neck. Because he hates a half-kept record, he moves to the phone to log a call on the off chance the mortician is awake. He lays his hand on the rotary, feels the cold plastic through his palm, and stops. The shop has rules, so does the town. You do not ring a door unless a fact already has a number. And yet, he thinks, this has numbers. 2 proofs, 1 slug, a time in a box. He lets his hand slide off the dial anyway. Not yet. Instead, he goes to the linotype with a mechanic's patience and walks the motions in slow air. He ghosts his fingers across the keyboard just above the tops of the keys and whispers where each letter would drop. He watches where the matrices would ride. He watches where the spacebands would climb and where the elevator would lift and where the mold would kiss and cool. He keeps his hands off the power. He keeps his breath shallow. He listens for some remembered clink to answer him. Nothing speaks back. However he imagines the machine stays quiet. At 23:58, he draws a small line under the first log entry and adds, "Second proof taken, slug boxed with ruler." 23:58. Then he steps to the door and lifts the blind a finger's width to look out. The hotel neon blinks its loop. On, pour O, off, and a single pair of headlights drifts by without stopping. Under the hum, the town is so still it feels chosen. Now midnight, he tells himself. Let the hour turn and see if the room turns with it. He takes his thermos, pours into the tin cup, and sets it beside the barometer. The same place he always sets it when a storm is rumoured, and he wants proof of the pressure. He takes one sip, writes Wurto 2 on his pad, and adds a humble line that calms him whenever he writes it. Night, watch, continues. Then, because he believes in small, repeatable tests, he tries a different angle. He pulls the shop's brownie from the cabinet, the one they use for ads when a merchant wants a picture of a lawnmower or a prize calf, and he snaps a slow, careful photo of the slug under the green lamp, ruler in frame, tape with the time legible. He turns the focus ring back and forth until the letters look crisp, then clicks the shutter. He is not a photographer, not really, but he understands that sometimes a second way of seeing keeps you honest. He winds the film and writes Brownie 1005 on the cabinet door, chalk mark, where they keep track of a roll's life. Meanwhile, he listens to the building's quiet grammar. The pipes tick, then settle. The cutter blade creaks as it forgets heat. Far off, a box on the shelf gives a sigh as cardboard eases. The sounds are old and good. Because the sounds are old and good, the new thing on the tray feels stranger. At hour 11, a small doubt tries to live in his head. Have I made this? Did I set it without knowing? He refuses it, not with ego, but with math. He paces his own steps backward and names them plainly. Locked door, cold pot, chalk mark at the cam, crosswise gas cock, clean assembler, quiet keyboard. Then he adds a simpler line, almost like a prayer against foolishness. If a thing happened, it left heat or shavings or smell. No heat, no shavings, no smell. Because sleep is a long way off, and he is a man who works by lists, he starts a new one, small and neat, at the bottom of the page. If I'm wrong, 1. Call manager, 2. Warm pot, 3. Cast fresh and compare, 4. Apologize to the room. If I'm right, 1. Keep paper, 2. Keep quiet, 3. Let morning confirm. After the list, he gives himself a chore that honors both paths. He takes a sheet of onion skin, light, whisper thin, and lays it over the proof. With a hard pencil, he traces the outline of the letters, just the outside, not the inner counters. The tracing is slow work and easy on the mind. When he's finished, he pins the onion skin beside the proofs and writes tracing 0019 on the corner. If anything shifts, the edges won't match later. That thought helps. Then, a practical thought. If the words are tomorrow's, then maybe tomorrow has already leaned into the room. He flips the small wall calendar to check the date, taps the nail to seat it, and counts ahead 3 squares to the weekly print day. He stares at the square, then at the proof, and then back. The math doesn't change, but sometimes holding the dates in your eyes lets the nerves settle. It doesn't quite work tonight. At 0027, he pulls down the shop's address directory and looks at the surname on the proof without saying it out loud. He scans the line of P.O. boxes, the rural routes, the penciled notes by 1 or 2 listings that say moved or gone to daughter. He stops when he reaches the entry he's avoiding and shuts the book gently. He will not call a house to ask a question that has no shape. Not yet. So he does what he knows. He tests hardware softly. He checks the door again. The bolt sits steady. The key ring rides his thumb. He presses the face of the slug with the pad of his finger to feel if the slightest warmth has crept in. It hasn't. He leans close, almost smiling at himself, and takes a breath through his nose beside the metal, a silly gesture, he knows, as if a word could leave a scent. Only dust and oil answer him, old and quiet. By 0:33 he has run out of things a sane man would do. Still the body wants motion. He paces the floor once more, then draws a thin line of chalk on the concrete from the desk leg to the stone's table, an old trick to mark whether the building shifts in a cold snap. He writes chalk line 0034 on his pad, because every small line is a promise to a morning pair of eyes. Then a smaller experiment. He breathes across the slug, a slow, steady breath to see if the onion skin trembles in a way that would show draft. It shivers once and then lies flat. The windows are tight. The room holds. And yet, however carefully he builds his circle of facts, the simple center remains. A cold machine produced a clean slug that names a person who is, as far as he knows, alive. He has no box for that. At E041 he does the plainest thing left. He sits. He places both hands flat on the desk, palms down, like a man steadying a map. He lets the green lamp wash the corkboard, the proofs, the onion trace, the pencil box, the ruler's edge. The light pools and doesn't spill. He watches long enough that the minute hand on the wall clock clicks forward twice. In that time, nothing moves that shouldn't. The slug sits where he set it. The ruler stays true. The pencil tick remains in its corner. The room breathes as a good room does. Finally, because a night has to be cut into pieces so it will pass, he gives himself to the simplest ritual. He refills the thermos cup. He writes a single new line in the log. Second check complete, room stable, 0045. And he circles the word stable once. The circle is not proof, but it is an anchor. It keeps his eye from being dragged by worry. Before he stands, he adds one more note in a smaller hand he almost never uses. Keep house. Style for header, do not reset if call comes. Then he taps the edge of the desk twice, once for the room, once for himself, and rises. On his way past the slug, he resists the urge to touch it again. Instead, he touches the ruler lightly as if to bless its job. He nods at the pinned proofs, the way men nod at a neighbor who holds the gate while you drive through. It is a silly nod, but it makes the leaving easier. He dims the stone's light, leaves the green lamp to keep watch, and walks toward the door with the care of a man carrying a full cup. The bolt lifts, then settles when he tests it. Outside, the alley air is colder. The shop behind him holds steady. He writes "You're 49" in his pocketbook, and under it 2 words that will make sense to him in the morning, even if they would not to anyone else. Kept quiet. At first, he tries to outweight the room. He lets the minutes pile like clean sheets. 0101, 0103, 0105. Meanwhile, the pencil box holds its square, the ruler its shine, the 2 proofs their calm twins on the cork. Nothing edges, nothing leans. The longer the stillness holds, the more the simple fact at the center grows. A cold machine made a living line. Because waiting without work feels wrong, he turns to the front page and audits it the way a man checks fence posts after wind. Line by line, he presses each slug with a thumb and watches for play. The mayor's quote sits tight. The farm price column runs clean. The church schedule, wed, fry, son, stays aligned. He marks 3 tiny pencil dots where a headline could use a hair more lead. After that, he rewraps the chase with fresh twine, crosses it once, knots twice, and writes tight on the rat tail so morning eyes won't waste a tug. Still, his glance keeps drifting back to the tray. So he gives himself another small proof to chase. The brownie again, but wider this time. desk edge, clock face, ruler, slug, the tape with 005. He modulates his breath, squares the frame, and clicks. He whines and notes, Brownie 20112 on the chalk. It isn't that he trusts photographs more than the hand, it's that two kinds of witnesses make the story feel less like he's telling it alone. Next, he pulls the mortuary file not for names but for times. He studies the narrow columns where calls land, 2210, 0405, 1847. Patterns live there, bad roads, winter lungs, Friday whiskey. He runs a finger down the column for this week and stops at blank space. He closes the folder gently as if not to bruise whatever the blank is holding. Then, because the body needs motion the way the mind needs paper, he climbs the small stool and checks the window latches, left snapped, right turned, middle true. He presses his palm to the glass and feels the town's cold, the way it feels on a car hood after church. Below, Main Street is bare. The hotel sign throws its O and swallows it. A dog crosses from shadow to shadow and becomes a thought instead of a shape. Inside again, the clock over the cutter clicks its stiff minute, late by 2 as always. He writes a header note the way he'd do on any ordinary night, house face, obit cut, 18p, then stops halfway through the next line because writing name on a line that has not been asked for feels like stepping into a family's kitchen uninvited. He erases once, soft, until the paper's tooth shows and the word is gone. Instead, he writes the neutral thing that will save time either way. Keep house. Style. Do not reset if call comes. The call. That word has its own weight. He pictures the mortician's voice, measured, already standing up, already looking for a coat. He hears the shuffle of paper under the voice, the sound of a pencil pulled from behind an ear and set on a pad, one slow scrape. The picture is too clear, so he pushes it away and pours a little coffee. The pour steadies him, it says now out loud in a quiet room. By degrees he tries to argue the mystery back into mechanics. He kneels with a flashlight and checks the linotype sump. No bright flecks, no little commas of cooled metal, no grey smear on the floor where a hot piece would have skated and died. He opens the covering door and watches the matrices ride, only they don't. They sit like a choir with mouths closed. He listens for the whisper a spaceband stack makes when it sighs down, but there's only the building's old breath. He touches the pot again and feels the kind of cold that has a number, the kind that says, this iron has been this way for hours. So then, not for belief, but for habit, he tries the smallest test of all. He twists the slug in its box with the lightest finger pressure, just enough to make the ruler whisper. The ruler does not whisper. The pencil tick stays in its corner. He removes his hand and tucks it into his armpit like a repentant child. He leaves the slug alone. At 0129, he writes a short line in the log that reads, like a man who wants a future self to trust him. Second check, no shift, room stable, board 129. He underlines stable because the word gives the eye a place to sit. Then, for balance, he writes the thing that keeps the eye moving, unexplained, slug present. Meanwhile, the town runs its small midnight behaviours. A train far off pulls once at its horn, and then holds it for the valley's throat to speak back. Somewhere a truck backs up, and the high beep reaches the shop as a needle instead of a sound. The shop, being a shop, keeps sounding like a shop. Paper settling, blade easing, wood remembering it is wood. He thinks of calling home to tell no one anything. He thinks of standing outside and walking to the diner to talk about something that has nothing to do with letters. He doesn't do either. Instead, he takes the onion skin tracing from section 2 and lays it on top of the proofs again, aligning edges. He checks the stroke of each letter, OF, the long cross of the T. All match. He pins the tracing back and writes Ir141 on its corner. If nothing else, he will give the morning a timeline that doesn't blink. Little by little, the urge to do fades to a quiet ability to watch. He sits in the desk chair and lets the green lamp make its small circle. He watches the dust move through it like it always does when the hot plate breathes. He watches the second hand jump its short jumps. He watches the cold edge of the slug throw a soft shadow on paper. The longer he watches, the more the shadow looks less like a thing that appeared and more like a thing that waited to be noticed. He does not write that down. He writes only the facts. Because facts like to be paired, he pairs each with a neighbor. Slug present pairs with pot cold. Proofs match pairs with no matrices moved. Name and age set pairs with no call received. It isn't a cure, but it is a way to walk a hard line without wobbling. At 01:53, the hotel sign across the street stutters through a short brownout on, then dark. Immediately, the shop's green lamp dims a hair and returns. He looks at the clock, 01:53 to 01:54. He looks at the slug, the ruler, the tick. Nothing shifts. He writes power dip, no change, 0154. The room, which has seemed like a person holding its breath, exhales once, softly, through the heating duct. He stands and smooths the lock sheet with his palm. The paper warms under skin. He adds a small square checkbox beside the 2322 line and checks it, as if to tell the square that the hour didn't undo itself. He reaches for the thermos, feels it lighter, and refills the cup. He watches the curl of steam like a man reading a forecast from the lip of a kettle. And then, because he can't find anything else to test that won't break a rule, he prepares for the two most opposite outcomes. For silence, he turns the proofs slightly so the light catches them in the same way a morning man will see when he sits. He writes a note for the foreman he becomes after sleep. Do not edit, photograph first. For a call, he pulls the obituary header leaders from the drawer, those two short hairlines that bracket a name, and lays them near the chase. He does not set them. He only makes them easier to reach with one hand. The minute hand climbs. 0156, 0157, 0158. Between each, he listens for some new thing to declare itself. None does. He imagines the mortician's house at this hour, lamp on the kitchen table, a coat by the door, a phone on its wall cradle, the cord bending where every hand in town has turned it. He imagines not the event that would start the call, only the paper that answers it. Times, dates, survivors, one adjective that belongs to the family and not to him. He remembers the rule he gave himself when he first took the foreman's chair. Paper can be tender if the metal is square. He lets the rule sit in his chest until it warms. At 01:59 he steps to the window again and looks out at a town that has agreed, for this minute, to be absolutely still. The dog has gone, the hotel's O returns and holds. The diner is finally dark. He touches his watch and then the clock, and lets both tick into the same second. 2 o'clock falls like a coin and stays on its edge. He waits. The room waits with him. He writes 02 Alt in the pocket pad and draws a line beneath section 2's last entry so the times don't tangle. He adds one more simple sentence that costs nothing to say and saves more than it costs. Room secure, holding. Then he sits, palms down again, keeping the steady posture he trusts when the world wants to tip. The phone, a black ear on the desk, faces him. The slug, a small square truth, faces the lamp. His cup sits between them like a referee. If a night had a hinge, it would be this thin stretch, 0201 to 0209, when even a careful man lets the mind paint futures on the door. He lets it a little. He doesn't chase them. He breathes in through his nose and out through his mouth until the breath sounds like the shop itself. By 0209, the air feels different only in the way late air always does, quieter, truer, a little colder above the wrist. He notes the minute because noting minutes is what he does when he cannot change them. And then, with no other fanfare than the click of a second-hand landing, he hears the small sound every night man knows by heart. The first ring, round and clear, of the desk phone beginning to speak. The first ring is round and patient. He lets it travel once across the room, just to be sure the sound belongs here and not in his head. Then on the second ring, he lifts the receiver the way a man lifts a lid on something hot. Careful. 2 fingers first, then the hand. "Print," he says, because that's the shop's whole name at night. A measured voice answers, already standing, already buttoning a coat. The mortician doesn't waste words. He gives the surname, then the age, then the street, each as if set from a card. He asks if the header can be ready by 6. The cadence is the cadence the town uses when it needs paper, without hurry and without delay. He does not say what waits under the lamp. Instead, he says yes, and pencils times while the voice lists the small mercies. Family present, pastor called, tomorrow afternoon, if the church can open the choir rail. He repeats the name back once, spells it letter by letter, hears the soft correct on a vowel, and corrects it too. "We'll keep house style," he says, which is his way of promising steadiness. When the call ends, the dial tone returns like water finding its level. He cradles the receiver and rests his palm on the bakelite a second longer than necessary, as if he's smoothing the surface of a pond. Now, one thing at a time. First, the record. He opens the lock sheet and writes the line with blocky care. Call received, obit confirm, 0211. Under it, he adds the address, a shorthand for the church, and the words, family with pastor. He boxes the time again because boxes pull an eye when morning is busy. Then he steps to the cork and, without touching the slug, pulls one of the proofs free and stamps the back with the small purple received AM pad, so there's no argument later about when the shop knew. Next, the work you can touch. He brings the chase to the stones table, lays down 2 hairline leaders and the house cut for of, and seats them in a dry lock just to confirm spacing. He does not cast. He does not warm the pot. He holds one leader with the tip of a fingernail and studies the proof beside it. The measures kiss perfectly. He relieves his nail and writes on the margin of the day job sheet, "No reset required. Pull from box." It looks like magic on paper. It behaves like ordinary in his hands. That combination is the closest thing to peace he gets on nights like this. Because proofs are their own kind of memory, he builds one more ring of them. He takes the brownie from the cabinet and frames the desk, the clock, the ruler, the slug, the boxed time. He clicks once, wins, and writes brownie 3 02116 on the cabinet chalk. He sets the camera back with the lens toward the wall, a habit that feels like closing an eye so it can sleep. Then he stands very still and listens for any complaint the room might make about being turned into a picture. The room doesn't complain. It seems almost relieved to have a witness that isn't a person. Meanwhile, a smaller task waits, the kind of task that keeps a man's head small enough to fit through morning. He draws a clean onion skin, writes the name in his neat print above the tracing he made earlier, and pins the sheet over the first proof with 2 fresh tacks. He writes trace 0218. He lifts the ruler off the pencil box at last, slides the slug a thumb's width to the galley, and feels a pulse of something like gratitude under the calm, a feeling with no good word that still belongs in the ledger of a life. Thank you for being here when asked. Now he allows himself to swallow what the moment has said. Not the how, which the room will not give him, but the what. A cold machine held a line for a family that had not called yet, and then handed it to the man who would answer. He does not decide what that means. He decides only what to do next. He lays the slug into the galley and marks it with a short pencil V, so that even a tired morning hand cannot misplace it. He writes "pull first" at the top of the job stack, and puts the stack where the pressman's left hand lands every day at 05:58. Because small towns are careful with grief, he makes a last pass at the details that soften. He checks the spelling again against the address book and adds a tiny tick above the vowel that tripped him on the phone, a private mark to keep his mouth exact when he sets the rest. He flips the calendar and dots the square 2 days ahead, the day the paper will run the full notice, so he won't forget to order the extra bundle to the church. He writes a narrow note for himself where only he will see it. Send second copy to Mrs. Kelby, front porch if no one answers. The dash is the right size for a name he will fill later. Finally, he tidies the room the way you close a sentence. The stone's light goes down first, then the aisle bulb, the cutter lamp, and last the little green circle over the desk. The green stays on. It always stays on when he wants the room to keep an eye on something. He gathers the proofs, the first, the second, the onion skin, and slides them under a single clip labelled "Hold." He taps the clip twice with one finger, a small sound like a period. He straightens the ruler on the edge of the desk, caps the stamp pad, wipes the roller, and sets the thermos back by the stamp pad so morning will look exactly where his hand expects to look. Before he leaves, he lets himself break one rule of the house, the one about not editorializing in the notes. On a narrow strip of paper he writes, in the smaller hand he uses when something is for him and not the file. Names changed when they need mercy. Times kept honest. He tucks the strip under the clip. It will not run in any edition. It will simply keep him company the way a folded scrap in a wallet does. At the door, he pauses with the bolt in his hand and looks back the way men look back at kitchens after a late wash, checking for the one glowing coil left on, the towel too near the stove, the drip you meant to stop. Everything sits where it should. The galley holds the slug with its pencil V. The proofs keep their twins under the clip. The camera sleeps. The ruler lies with its spine aligned to the desk edge like a spine should be. It is all ordinary. It is all a little more than ordinary. He turns the bolt and listens for the clean note. It lands. Outside, the alley smells faintly of coal and frost. He writes 2:23 in his pocketbook, and below it a small word he only writes on nights when the paper and the town understand each other without argument. Ready. On the walk home he will think about how some tools speak when they are cold, and how that speaking is never louder than the work the living still have to do. In the morning he will say nothing about magic. He will say, pull the header from the galley, and watch the measure on the second line and run a clean copy to the church. The shop will hum, and the page will take its weight, and by noon the little green circle over the desk will be the only eye left remembering what it saw. For now the night turns the corner. The alley holds its breath and then lets it go. Somewhere far south by a desert ridge, another room will take up the keeping, paper feeding itself at Willow Zero, a header newly stamped, old words repeating, and a man with a thermos circling a time that lands true. Different town, same hour, keep the volume low and follow the paper to where the wind begins to write. The weather room sits low against the desert like a hand laid flat on a table. One window faces the dark ridge. One green lamp pulls over a desk. A barometer, a rain gauge card, and a teletype share the top. like three quiet clocks that disagree in useful ways. Every night begins the same. Unlock, click the lamp, breathe once to count the dryness, and set the thermos down beside the barometer so the hour has a shape. He is the volunteer observer. Midnights, when the regular man sleeps, careful with numbers, careful with silence. As usual, he opens the station log to a fresh line and writes the plainest things first. Date, 23:47, sky, clear, wind, light, variable, temp, cool for season. He circles the pressure because circling pressure has become a habit. It gives his eye an anchor when wind wants to tell stories. The teletype squats in the corner like a small animal that eats paper. Its side panel carries a brass tag from years ago, the station ID stamped shallow by a man who liked straight letters. Before anything else, he smooths a new length of green bar into the plate and checks the index holes at the sides and seats the paper with the same care some men give to bread dough or rifle bolts. There's a comfort in seating it square, the way it promises the machine will feed straight if it feeds at all. Outside, the ridge is harder than the sky. A train shifts its weight on far rails and lets one long note run thin across the valley. Dust from someone's road hangs low and then gives up. Inside, the room is the small kind of warm that belongs to filament bulbs and old motors that haven't turned yet. He walks the little loop, door, switch, lamp, desk, then stands with his hands flat on the blotter. Now, the ritual. He taps the barometer face once, just enough to loosen a stubborn needle, reads it again, writes the tenths. He checks the anemometer cups through the window. Still. He jots the sky in 2 words, stars steady, and adds the time. By degrees, the room becomes what he needs to believe it is. Simple, squared, honest. At 23:56, he winds the teletype ribbon forward a few inches because stale ink tells lies. The ribbon shows a fresh run of dark and then a paler spot and then dark again, the pattern of a week. He takes the shallow tin of oil, touches one felt pad with the corner of a cloth and returns the tin to the shelf. Then, because nights stretch unless you cut them, he pours a small coffee and sets the tin cup on the log's empty margin for heat, to leave a ring he will not mind. He glances once at the 3-day-old forecast pinned above the desk. Wind shifting northerly, dust likely near 02:10, clearing after dawn. The header bears Monday's date. The body is written like a kind letter that was copied from a colder one. He knows the tone now, knows where the commas sit. He leaves it there because paper makes good company when you do not want to talk. Meanwhile, the second hand climbs to the top of the hour. Midnight is a clean kind of number. The teletype, quiet for the last 50 minutes, answers it with a small throat clear, a relay click, and a motor, like a dog turning in sleep. He freezes, not with fear, with practice. Machines announce themselves this way. You listen first. You touch second. You decide third. The carriage nudges left and stops. The feed wheels take their first bite of green bar. The type bars rise like a row of teeth. Gently, he steps closer until he can read what ribbon and metal agree to say. A header stamps at the top edge with tonight's date, day and month correct, hour aligned, station tag fresh. A breath later, the body begins to pour, and he knows it before he reads it, because cadence arrives ahead of words. Wind shifting northerly, slight dust, U210. His pen lifts off the log without meaning to. Word for word, the machine lays the old forecast's body onto new paper, lines breaking in the same places, long numbers rolling onto the same columns like they've been told to hit their marks. For 1 second, he lets the two truths sit side by side. Today's header, Monday's voice. Then he turns to the log and writes a clean line that does not blink. Forecast received. Header, new. Text, as 72 HR prior. He puts a square around Dura so morning eyes cannot miss where the night decided to do something odd. He does not touch the teletype, he steps to it the way you step to a dog that has something in its mouth you want but do not want to fight over. The motor hum is steady, the letters strike with no hesitation, the paper feeds true. He watches the Platon chew the green bar and gives it the approval in his head that he would give a boy who aligned a cut straight. Good, good. Then the counterweight in him, trained by radios that spit static and thermometers that lie after hands, makes him take a safety step. He moves to the outlet and traces the cord with 2 fingers back to the machine. He does not pull, he only learns the path so that if he needs to, he won't be clumsy. The cord is warm enough to be honest about power. The plug sits firm. Line after line, the echo writes itself. He hears the faint tap of numerals landing where numerals landed 3 nights ago. He hears the hyphen's small breath. He hears the carriage returns ding at the right margin. Across the desk, the Monday print, pinned at eye level, looks back at him like a mirror that's 1 day behind. He tries to argue the room back into one world. Maybe the liaison cued a repeat, maybe the line burped, maybe somebody upriver sent a test. He will let those live as maybes, but he knows the cadence of an accidental loop. It stutters. This doesn't. It has the confidence of a plan. So he does the next plain thing, pair the voices. He lifts the Monday sheet off the pin, lays it beside the new print, and draws a ruler line across both, so the same words should cross the same graphite. He keeps his pencil flat to save the paper's tooth, and drags the line once, slow. The letters land across it in the same place. He writes under the log line, alignment, matches, prior exactly. He returns to the window for 1 second, not because he expects dust yet, but because the sky is a kind of clock too. The ridge holds its hard edge. The stars have that desert steadiness that makes you suspect they're screws, not fire. The anemometer cups don't turn. He breathes through his nose until he can taste the dry metal of the air and the old pennies of the room. Back at the desk, the echo reaches the line he's been waiting to see. Dust by Do Twintel. He circles it gently with the pencil, once, because circling helps his hand stay on the page instead of in the air. He writes, watch 0205215 on the log like he always does when time stops being general and starts being specific. Then he places his thermos cap exactly where it always sits when a minute matters, just north of the barometer, slightly left of the logbook, so his muscle memory does not lose him when his mind wants to run. The machine finishes the paragraph and clicks into the next. The sound is all small satisfactions: relay, hammer, feed, return. He lets it run without blessing it and without doubting it. Meanwhile, he adds small proof rings the way a careful man adds fence posts. He writes the paper length remaining, he writes the ribbons feel, he writes that the carriage teeth caught clean on each return. He tells the truth the way the room likes it, brief, squared, free of adjectives. When the last line stamps and the machine spits a shy blank, he doesn't touch it. Instead, he tears the strip with 2 hands, smooth and even, and lays tonight's print beside Monday's. The headers disagree. The bodies nod along in unison. He pins both to the cork with room between for a 3rd sheet, because something about the space says you will want one more witness. He writes Mon Siron Wura or Rig. Below it, Buddha Iswaran Wubaro, echo. He underlines nothing. Finally, because a room stays honest when you give it a margin, he does the smallest test he trusts most. He listens. He stands still enough that the cooling motor makes its barely there descend from to no. He hears a moth kiss the window screen and fail to understand glass. He hears sand tick in the draft at the door. He hears his own breath decide to be slow. Nothing else moves. The echo has done what it came to do, and the world, for a moment, is willing to go back to being plain. He writes a last line for the hour. 1:07, echo filed, no wind, sky clear, and draws a square around filed. Then he sets his pencil in the blotter's groove and cups the thermos for heat like it can steady the coming minutes. From here, the job gets simpler and harder at the same time. Keep the room small, keep the paper straight, and see whether the night gives the one thing that makes a forecast a promise, the event itself landing on the dot. First, he does the tidy work that keeps a night honest. He lifts both sheets, the Monday original and tonight's echo, pins them with a little daylight between, and writes the simplest labels a morning eye can trust. Mon Usulbo Ozursul Ulrig on the left, THU Uldaro Baudaro Echo on the right. Then he draws a straight pencil rule across both pages at mid-paragraph, slow and level, so the same words must cross the same graphite. They do. He writes one small word beneath the line, flush, because that's the printer's word for a thing that sits exactly where it should. Next, he gives himself a control. He tears a third sheet from the green bar roll and copies by hand the one sentence that matters. Dust by DRC. Letters, blocky, spacing, careful, as if his pen can carry weight the ribbon already holds. He pins his handwritten line between the two prints, dates it, and circles the time. If later the room feels like it changed its story, he wants this small human sentence to be the hinge it can swing back to. Because machines can trick a man who wants to be impressed, he tests the simplest thing, the plug. He follows the cord with 2 fingers to the wall, unplugs the teletype, and lays the cord on the floor, so the prongs look at him like small, silvery teeth. He writes in the log, 12 TT unplugged, echo pages filed. He stands still a full minute. The room keeps its quiet. No new paper crawls, no motor sings. Satisfied, he coils the cord and hooks it on the bracket. Not to be fussy, just so a stumble later won't have a villain he made. Meanwhile, he tends the other clocks. He taps the barometer glass gently, old habit to free a sticky needle, notes a fall of a tenth, and prints the tenths twice, once in the log, once on a little index card that rides a paperclip by the window, so a quick turn of the head tells the same truth. He writes the wind in plain words, calm to light, and the sky in 2, stars steady. Then he pours a short inch of coffee and sets the cup by the card so the warmth draws a fog ring he can use as a tiny hourglass. Because time wants compartments, he builds them. 0020 0040 will be for instruments. 0040 01 0 for the letter to the liaison. 01 002 0 for watching the ridge and keeping the notes clean. He writes those brackets small in the margin, a private contract he'll try not to break. So, instruments. He steps outside with the flashlight tipped down low. The desert night has a way of magnifying small sounds. Gravel, a jacket seam, the breath that fogs your lip. He walks to the rain gauge, checks the funnel, sees nothing but a star caught in the meniscus and blinking because his hand shakes a little. He smiles at that. He reads the thermometer nailed to the porch post, writes the number in his pocket pad, 1 line, no commentary, and tucks the pencil away. On the way back, he pauses at the door and listens for wind rubbing the door sweep. There is none. He kneels anyway and lays a strip of masking tape across the threshold so a later drift will scuff it. He writes tape, door 28, beside the seam. Inside again, he washes his hands quickly. Ink from the ribbon lives on the skin longer than you think, and dries them on the corner of a towel that always hangs wrong because the nail is crooked. Then he sits and drafts the first paragraph of his liaison note in a block, hand the other man can read at a glance. 0 Echo observed. Header stamp current, body text matches 72 Olge prior. Machine behavior normal, no stutter. Cadence true. Teletype unplugged at 0.12, no further motion. Will verify event window 0205-215. He writes cadence true and scratches it out because it sounds like a poet, not a station observer. He replaces it with line breaks identical. Better. At 0037, a moth finds the window screen and taps it with the vague hope that separates insects from facts. For a moment, the tapping feels like a test of his own steadiness. He takes a breath, moves the lampshade a hair so light falls less hard on the pane, and the moth gives up. He notes nothing about the moth. Not every visitor belongs in the log. R41 brings a small drop in pressure. He taps the face, confirms the 10th, and circles it, because circles help him see the story the way the wind sees it, without sentences. He adds, temp steady to keep the shape honest. Then he copies his liaison draft onto a clean sheet with fewer scratches, folds it once, and tucks it into the outgoing slot. If the event lands true, this letter will carry both pages, Mondays and tonight's, and a third sheet with his ruler line across them. If it does not, the letter will still speak plainly, something repeated that had no reason to. He checks the anemometer again, cups still idle, and makes himself a small knot test. He sets a thin strip of onion skin upright against a pencil on the sill. If any breath moves through the room, the paper will lean, and he'll see it out of the side of his eye. It stays at attention. He likes that. By 0:55, the room has the held breath feeling he recognizes from other honest nights, the kind when weather is deciding and people are sleeping, and the only job left is to write what arrives. He drinks the last warm half-inch, refills, and turns the cup so the handle points right. That way, when his hand reaches without looking, the lip meets his mouth at the same angle. Little arrangements like that make late minutes less slippery. At 0103 he hears a faint change outside, but nothing that becomes something if you give it a name. He does not. He writes 103 outside listen, and stands by the door until his ribs tell him he has been holding air. He lets it out. The tape at the threshold looks just laid. The onion skin at the pencil stays upright. The world returns to its default, waiting, because the hands like work. When the head must wait, he sharpens 2 pencils. He shaves long, even curls, and lays them in the trash like shy fish. Then he sweeps the desk with the heel of his hand so grit will not mark the page when the page must matter. After that he reaches for the Monday sheet and makes a copy of the wind line in his notebook, not to duplicate, but to keep the cadence in his hand. Sometimes copying words reminds you that words are only lengths of sound. They do not cause the thing they describe. At 0117, a truck on the highway down valley climbs a gear and drops it. The sound comes in dry, then goes, like a zipper. He writes truck very small and then strikes it. He doesn't want noise to look like evidence when he rereads this later. Then, for the first time in an hour, the barometer needle nudges on its own and doesn't need a tap. He notes the third 10th down, underlines it, and writes watch ridge. He turns the lamp a little so the desk keeps its circle, but the window catches a touch more of the sky. He opens the door and steps out far enough that the building isn't a wall to his ears. The ridge is a darker black against black. The stars are screws again, fixed, patient. He squints at the anemometer. 1 cup murmurs a quarter turn and stops. He stays until his knuckles say it's colder by a breath and goes back in. At 0129 he checks the papers on the cork again, not because paper can change when you don't look, but because he has learned that a second glance will tell him if he misread his own marks. The ruler line is still boss across both pages. His handwritten hinge still sits between. Nothing has drifted, and that not drifting is its own kind of ballast. Quietly, he writes himself a little checklist for the 10 minutes that will matter. 01:58, step to door. 02:01, eyes on ridge. 02:05:02.15, right, wind, grit, sound. Door tape, sill, after, file pages. Letter. He sets the pencil on the groove in the blotter and places his right hand flat beside the log so the muscles can memorize the reach. He flexes his fingers once. He lets his shoulders drop. He hears the lamp hum like a distant transformer and lets it be his metronome. Near 01:37, a thin, dry scent arrives, the kind of smell dust carries before it has a body, more suggestion than grit. He doesn't trust noses, not alone, so he looks at the window, the nonsense scrap of onion skin, the door tape. The onion skin holds, the tape lies clean. He writes scent only. He turns one page back in the station book to a spring storm he logged 2 years ago, the one that arrived 15 minutes late and then apologized with thunder. He reads his own tight letters, late, then heavy, and closes the book again. It helps to remember that time can be a poor driver and still get you home. At 01:44, he hears a single grain tick across the sill inside, so small that he wonders if a mouse breathed out there. He does not move. He writes tick on sill, 1. Then he steps to the sill and looks. The paint shows one new speck. No track, no line, just a dot that he could blow away. He doesn't. He wants morning eyes to see it the way he does, small but present. From here, he lets the room narrow to the triangle of work that will hold him to the hour. Window, log, door. He breathes in on numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out on words. Hold, still, listen, write. A trick learned from a pilot who told him once that calm is a muscle if you train it. So 01:52 asks nothing. So 01:54 answers with nothing. 01:56 offers him the mundane mercy of a cup warming a hand. He takes it. 01:58 arrives like a knock he expected. He stands, smooths the log flat with his palm, and walks to the door. His finger rests on the latch, not ready to open, only ready to feel the door talk if it wants to. And then, because every long watch needs one neat promise to keep the watcher from making things up, he writes a single line before the minute turns. If nothing comes, file echo as anomaly. If something comes, file echo as clock. He underlines clock once. The pencil makes a gentle, granular sound on the paper that comforts him more than it should. O2 lands without ceremony. The second hand hops. The lamp hum holds. The ridge stays black and harder than sky. He puts 2 fingers to the door seam. The wood is cool. The tape is still smooth. He writes in 200 steady and lets the pencil hover over white space, ready to move the second the wind does. At first, the hour gives him nothing to write but his own patience. 02:01 is a blank with a heartbeat. The lamp hum sits where it has sat all night. The onion skin flag on the pencil stays soldier straight. He lets his fingers rest on the door seam until he can tell the difference between wood's cold and air's cold. Then a small mercy for the watcher. So 02:03 brings a sound that isn't quite wind and isn't quite silence, the faint, dry shh you hear when you slide a long match along its box without striking. He does not open the door. He writes, "Oh, long match sound, no movement on cups." He turns his head to the window, so slow the glass doesn't know he moved. Outside, the ridge keeps its hard black, but the near ground changes character. Less crisp, more suggestion than edge. The anemometer cups give a reluctant quarter turn and decide against a second. The onion skin stays true. He notes both truths side by side, because pairing keeps a man honest, hint of motion. No indoor draft. 0205 asks for his knuckles. He lays them against the seam again. The wood is still cool, but there's a pressure under it, the kind of gentle push you feel when a closed door and a hallway disagree about who owns the air. He writes, pressure slight. He does not call it wind. Words earn their shapes here. Because he likes one proof that lives on the floor as well as the page, he glances at the masking tape laid at the threshold back at 0028. It is still pristine, edges sharp. He draws a little empty box on the log beside tape and leaves it waiting for a check that isn't his to give yet. Meanwhile, the room does its small mechanics. The barometer needle walks a hair without the encouragement of his fingernail. The lamp hum dips and resumes, the way a transformer sings when a neighbor flips a light 2 blocks away. He writes pressure, 0.1, and circles it. He thinks of the 2 pages on the cork, Mon 000, Orig, and Tichido, or 00, Echo, standing like 2 quiet witnesses asking him to keep his sentences smaller than his guesses. 0206 brings the first speck that would justify writing dust on a line. It is nothing impressive, only a single grain that scoots 3 inches along the sill inside as if practiced. He does not blow it away. He writes grain on sill, 1 line. He draws that line short and neat because lines behave better than adjectives when you read them at breakfast. He opens the door just enough to let the hinge tell the truth without surrendering the room. The outside air isn't colder, it is simply drier in motion. The difference is small and exact. The way felt changes when you stroke it with instead of against. He holds the latch position like a measured note and counts under his breath to give the minuter spine 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he eases the door shut again and notes air in motion. Low. By 0207, Grit has voice now, not much. Just enough to make the world speak in a quieter alphabet, S, F, T. The onion skin leans the width of its own paper and returns. He writes, flag, leaned, returned. The cups spin once and choose to keep going this time. Not fast, but steady in the small way you respect more than a gale because it had to decide to exist. He writes cups turning continuous. Light. He moves to the cork and circles the handwritten hinge he made earlier, the one sentence that matters, dust by Otunsel. Then, because evidence likes company, he pulls a blank green bar and writes, watch begins at the margin. He leaves the sheet loose under his left hand, ready to catch any detail the log shouldn't swallow. 0208 is when the room chooses sides. The masking tape at the threshold scuffs, just a thumbprint of abrasion, but it is newer than the tape and older than his doubt. He puts the cleanest check he owns in the empty box he drew earlier and writes tape scuffed beside it. He does not underline the check is enough. A soft patter follows on the sill outside, the kind that would not wake anyone, would not even make a cat look up, but it is countable. He writes patter Alford sill, consistent 6 to 8 sec. The pen leaves a tiny ink pool at the comma. He turns it 1/4 inch and continues. He refuses to let his hand hurry. 0209 lifts a thin veil off the near ground. The star screws dim a whisper, not a degree. The ridge keeps itself, black on black, but the air between him and it looks briefly like a fabric you could pinch and release. He writes visibility, soft near, ridge sharp. He knows that sounds like a contradiction. It is. Good notes hold contradictions until morning chooses which one belongs on the report. He puts 2 fingers on the log to steady the paper and not himself. He hears a short stream of grit push along the door sweep and settle like a polite crowd taking seats. He writes sweep, sibilant 3s, and smiles at himself for the poetry breaking in. He scratches sibilant out and prints soft above it. The station book will thank him later. And then 0210 arrives without trumpets, which is how many true things arrive. A single, long scrape whispers, "Down valley." Not thunder, not rail, not highway, just the kind of sound dust makes when it finds itself all at once. He writes 0210, event, and draws a clean box around 0210 the way he boxed 000 an hour ago. He opens the door a hand's width. The air enters rather than falls in. Dust slides under the sweep as if it has practiced the room's map. His front teeth learn grit before his tongue does. He writes taste present and follows it with wind, light, settling. He steps to the window and watches the anemometer cups spin with new conviction, not hard, not showy, just true enough that a small boy would notice from a porch and say, "Wind." He writes cup steady and adds direction. NS by feel, a phrase he has used only twice in this book because the office likes numbers better than hands. Still, in towns like this, hands have been telling the truth longer. Immediately after, he checks the room that will have to tell the story later when he is only a voice at a breakfast table, cork, sheets, ruler line. The two forecasts stand calm, the ruler mark crossing both in the same place like a bridge, no flood threatened. He does not add a third page yet. He is tempted. He doesn't move. He returns to the threshold and looks for the plainest proof a mayor would accept, a change you can kneel beside. The masking tape now shows a faint drift ridge along its edge, the kind of miniature dune a child might blow away and then cry for having ruined. He writes drift at tape edge, 2 millimilli. Then he writes leave, undisturbed. He stands and lets the pencil rest. While the grit works, he keeps the log lines short to fit the pace of a minute behaving well. He allows himself one longer sentence, because a man gets one per hour when the world keeps time. Echo predicted the minute, and the minute arrived. He doesn't box it. He doesn't underline. He just lets the letters sit level on the green bar. By 0213, the room is the kind of dirty that isn't a mess, or a memory on the surface. The onion skin flag leans and decides to stay leaned. He notes flag tilt holds, minor, and sets a fresh sheet under his hand so the grit won't grind letters into the pulp of the log. He glances at the unplugged teletype, cord-hooked, prongs like teeth, just to be certain the room didn't cheat and hand him a third page while he watched the door. It didn't. He writes TT unplugged, no motion for a morning reader who will need his steadiness more than his poetry. Gently, he closes the door and sets the latch so the room can keep its own air. He taps the barometer face once, not to adjust it, just to hear the glass admit it has heard the hour. He enters pressure holds at new low and puts a small dot beside low to remind himself this is not drama, only measure. The dust eases the way it came, unspectacular, exact. So too 14 cups slow. So too 15 the sills patter thins to single dots that have names if you get too fond of them. He writes patter sporadic and draws a line to the left margin where he prints the word that lets him put his pencil down without feeling like he abandoned the minute landed. After, he lets himself look at the cork as a man looks at a map he has finally walked. 2 pages, 2 dates, 1 ruler line, 1 circled minute. He considers the brownie and decides the pages are already photographs of themselves. He takes the right-hand sheet, the THU000 echo, and stamps its back with the small purple received AM pad, so no clerk upstream can argue the witness into a different hour. He replaces it and presses the tack heads flat with his thumb, not hard, just enough to feel metal answer skin. He writes one last line across the bottom of the page in a hand that stays smaller than his relief. 0216 event verified, echo behaved as clock, dustlight, entry complete. He draws a short horizontal that kisses the left margin and the right, a quiet frame. Then he sets the pencil in the blotter groove, turns the cup so the handle points right again, and lets his shoulders find their level. From here, the work softens. File, fold, mail, sweep the sill, fetch a damp cloth for the tape edge. But he does none of that yet. He keeps the room as is for a few more minutes because as is the only way you can carry a true hour into a morning without rearranging it. He listens to the desert fall quiet the way a page falls quiet after the period. And when he turns toward the cork to take the first photo with his notes in frame, his angle catches a small shine he recognizes from rooms far to the northwest. Light on a bead of water that should not be there, on a surface that should be dry. Not here, not now, but at a hatchery rail 1,000 miles away, a click counter is about to advance once, and then 11 more, as if a dozen silver bodies slid past in black water with the gates shut. He straightens the sheet, nods to the circled minute, and lets the night hand the story to water. He stays still long enough to learn what the room intends to do with the rest of the hour. Almost nothing. The cups outside slow to polite suggestions. The thin square of onion skin on the pencil leans, then chooses to keep leaning, like a listener finished nodding. Dust lifts its hand and stops waving. He exhales through his nose and lets the rhythm of the place settle around him. Lamp hum, desert quiet, the soft tick of a cooling motor that isn't truly cooling anything, just remembering how. He decides not to pick up the pen again. The important sentence has already been written by a machine and by air. Midnight stamped a fresh header, and at 02:10 the world complied. More words won't make that truer. So he gives the paper a tidy place to sleep. He straightens the corkboard so the frame sits square and pins the two sheets a finger's width apart. Monday's original on the left, tonight's echo on the right. He doesn't underline the time boxes or draw a second ruler line across the pair. The first one holds. The left header and the right header disagree by date in a way that feels useful rather than fussy. The bodies, those quiet blocks of type where wind and numbers live, match without flourish. Their hyphens land in the same ruts. Their long numbers end in the same columns. Even the awkward break where a verb wandered to a new line repeats like muscle memory. It looks like choreography done by two dancers who never met, but learned from the same teacher. He steps back one pace, enough to make the pair read as a single object, a proof of steadiness, the kind you'd trust with a nail in a storm. He doesn't frame the view with his hands. He doesn't take a breath as if making a wish. He just stands until the cork's texture resolves, until the two sheets feel less like papers and more like a small device ticking. A device is a comfort, not a marvel or a riddle, just a dependable thing speaking its range. Next, the bundle for daylight. He doesn't hurry the letter because letters written to be read after coffee should feel like a hand resting on a counter, not a hand grabbing a sleeve. He plants the paper under the lamp, writes the station call sign once, the date once, and then a paragraph without any reaching adjectives. The Teletype printed a forecast at Duldro with a current header and a body identical to the forecast that printed 3 nights earlier. The machine behaved normally while printing, then stayed quiet. Dust arrived at 02:10 and behaved as light rather than blowing, a distinction that matters only to people who have to decide whether to close a road or wash their porch. He adds the simple sentence that settles the matter for him, treating the repetition as a timing device until proven otherwise. He reads the line, doubts the word device, crosses it, and writes clock. He signs with his first initial and the short version of his last name, folds and slides the page into a manila meant for the liaison. The glue tastes faintly of paper, and something floral that was never a flower. He presses the flap, then presses it again, equal pressure, as if equality itself makes truth easier to carry. He tucks into the envelope the 2 prints and a neat carbon of his notes. He doesn't include a photograph yet. The brownie will come in a minute. He writes the liaison's name with a square hand on the front and sets the envelope under the green lamp. Night packages want to sit somewhere a morning eye forgives, somewhere that makes a person reaching for it feel expected rather than accused. Housekeeping next, but housekeeping that respects proof. He touches the tape at the threshold with the pad of 1 finger. The edge carries the faintest ridge from the dust's small try at a dune. He lifts the ridge with 1 slow swipe of a damp cloth and leaves the tape in place. The tape is a story too now. The next person will want to see where the line once was. He drags the cloth along the sill just once, not a back and forth that would turn grit into paste, only a single pull like closing a drawer. The water in the sink darkens with what the desert gave back. He wrings the cloth into a neat twist, squeezes until the twist relaxes, and hangs it from the bent nail where every watcher for 10 years has hung cloths to dry. It falls at the same angle they all did, proof that even nails learn the habits of hands. He rinses the cup and sets it upside down on the blotter's dry corner. He sets the pencil in the groove, point rightward, so the first hand in the morning won't have to hunt around for direction. Every small pre-approval is a gift to a tired future self. The teletype cord hangs from its hook like a question he has already answered. He leaves it unanswered anyway. He will not seat the plug and ask the machine if it has 1 more page in it. The hour has already spoken. Asking for an encore is how you spoil a truth. He writes himself a small instruction on a strip of scrap. Leave cord unseated, photographs first, seat only in daylight if needed, and tucks the strip under the manila's corner. He doesn't need the instruction to remember. The strip is for the person who opens the door after him and wonders what he was thinking. He stands with his hand flat on the door frame and lets the building report. The seam is cool under his fingers. No push, no furtive draw. Glass sits easy in its channel. The present air has finished its errand. All it carries now is the suggestion of dust, the way your coat sometimes carries the suggestion of rain after a morning that never quite made up its mind. He swallows, tastes grit at the back of his tongue, and thanks the part of the job that can still be proven by a mouth. He writes a short door tag for the day watcher, nothing with opinions in it. Envelope prepared and placed, 2 prints pinned with room. World kept its appointment, cord left out of the wall. He signs his tight initials and loops the string over the knob. The green lamp stays on. He always leaves one seeing circle behind in these rooms, an eye that belongs to nobody and so behaves better than yours or mine. Habit asks for a last look, not out of fear, but because your brain expects you to prove each small closure to it with your eyes. He lets his gaze ride the things that matter, the 2 sheets on cork, the ruler line cutting across both like a seam that refused to hide, the circled minute that brought weather to heal, the cup set to drip dry, the pencil squared, the dangling plug, the manila under the lamp, everything in its shape. He reaches for the chain, and the overhead bulb goes, the lamp's circle survives, soft as a night window in a train. The room drops into its native dark. The world outside feels rinsed. He turns the latch, listens to the bolt decide, adds the sound to his private ledger of notes that never get written. The good note that means the day will trust you. He locks. He checks the handle once. Hands believe knobs, not sentences. The cool metal under his palm is as familiar as a pocket coin. He eases the door and the night trades places with him, inside out, outside in. He stands long enough for his pupils to argue with the desert about how many stars exist and which ones belong to screws and which to holes. The ridge is a sawtooth cutout against a chalk wall. Some nights that makes him feel small. Tonight it makes him feel held. He starts the walk with an inventory of the practical: envelope under lamp, 2 sheets pinned, plug unseated, sill wiped, tape left to speak, door tag hung. He takes 10 steps and invents the list again, not because he doubts it, but the way a person checks pockets on a platform: ticket, keys, coin, knowing they are there and liking the small permission to touch. The road dips where the flood rerouted a season ago and never came back to apologize. He steps in his own rhythm, a long, even count that warms the breath without borrowing it. The desert has that late-hour smell of water, dust and creosote, even where no water came. It is a trick the valley plays some nights, and he never minds. He likes a lie that wants to make you feel like something has been tended. He passes the angle where the power line hum eats at the corner of your skull and then lets you go, and he is grateful that machines, even sleeping, announce themselves. The sky is charcoal and salt. A single porch light coughs itself awake 2 blocks over and decides against it. He counts fence posts for a bit and stops before numbers become superstition. He does not rehearse an answer for anyone who might call at 9 to ask whether he believes in something larger than the run of ribbon and a forecast that keeps appointments. He has learned that belief is not a very good tool compared with paper. What he rehearses instead is the small, serviceable sequence of the morning. Open point, let the page, tell it. It will sound like this. Here's Monday with a fresh header from Monday. Here's tonight with a fresh header from tonight. The bodies match. We left the machine unplugged afterward. Dust arrived on the minute promised. Would you like coffee? It always helps to end with coffee. The town shrinks and expands as it does when you're the person walking alone through it. Houses become shapes, then addresses, then a memory of who rings which bell, and which bell you never ring because the person behind it sleeps too lightly for strangers. He thinks once about the use of the word echo. It pleases him because it does not ask for any posture, doesn't need mystics or mechanics, only a mouth and a wall, and the time it takes for sound to return. You could explain tonight by telling a child about a canyon. You could explain it by showing a librarian 2 sheets with a line that doesn't blink. Both would do. He is a person who believes that choices like that matter for towns, whether you ask them to kneel or to nod. He crosses the last gravel and nudges open a gate that complains in a familiar way and then forgives him. The porch steps know his shoe better than they know his face. The door does the good click. He sets the thermos on the small table where he keeps bread, matches, and 3 envelopes from people who never wrote and never will. He stands a second with his hand on the wall just to hear the house opinion of the night. Wood easy, air easier. He toes his boots off without untying them, a laziness he will scold and repeat tomorrow. He could sleep now, but he doesn't lie down yet. He rinses out the thermos cap and leaves it upside down on a towel that smells faintly of sun from a season ago. He looks at his hands in the kitchen light and sees the half-moons of dust in the curls of his fingerprints, the way small work marks a person more kindly than big work does. He washes them and watches the water carry the valley to a drain. He finds this, for reasons he does not examine, beautiful. He turns the lamp toward the wall so the room has a place to look that is not his face, and sits in the one chair that fits the angle of his back on good nights. He doesn't let his mind play with explanations. He gives it small chores instead. Count to 60 twice and stop. Breathe with the idea of the ridge, not with the idea of paper. Remember that clocks need people to call them clocks, and that tonight he did the calling. It's enough. He thinks about the 2 sheets again, but briefly, as if waving at someone through a diner window instead of crossing the street. The left sheet had Monday's posture, the right had tonight's posture, and both held the same sentence like a handrail. The rail was what mattered. The rail is what the day can grab when the room empties and debates arrive. His work was only to wipe it dry and mark where it stayed firm. He closes his eyes and sees the circle he drew around the minute. He tries to picture it without fingers, just ink and intention, and then lets that fade too. He tells himself the simplest closed story he can tolerate. Sometimes a machine repeats. Sometimes the world agrees to meet where it repeats. When it does, write it down. If anyone asks you why, point to the page. If they ask what it means, point to the clock. If they ask more, ask if they would like coffee. Sometime between that sentence and a half-waking where the lamp looks like a quarter moon, he sleeps. It is not the sleep of someone who solved a riddle. It is the sleep of someone who put a chair where a minute could sit and then removed the chair when the minute left. His breath says the work was fair and small and finished. Dawn is a grey postcard. He wakes already dressed in the part of him that keeps the station honest. He washes his face in water that makes his eyes sting for a second, not for sentiment, but because desert water is made of neighbours you can't see. He hangs the towel the same wrong way on the same wrong nail. He drinks a finger of coffee he should not drink, and does. He puts the thermos under his arm with the familiarity of a violin and steps back into a light that doesn't yet have opinions. The envelope under the green lamp will find its route. The pinned sheets will become 3 tacks at noon, 2 at dusk, none by Tuesday. The man who comes after him will write in a bigger hand and will say, "Huh," with the tone of someone who respects evidence, but won't invite it to dinner. The liaison will write back with words that bear the weight they can, echo, repeat, observed, and skip the ones that try to carry more than they can lift. Good. None of that changes how the hour felt from the inside, anticipating a minute and then feeling that minute arrive with enough softness that you could carry it in one hand without spilling. If a human life is mostly waiting for the few minutes that insist on being kept, then he has kept one. The job is not more mysterious than that. It is also not less. He closes his door and listens for the little sigh a house makes when its first person leaves and promises to come back. He gives the sky one nod without asking it for anything. He starts down the path that will turn from yard to road to station so gradually that you can't tell where home stops and work begins. Elsewhere, the night has managed its own edit. No dust there, no sky to study. The air smells of wet cedar and clean aluminum. The light is a different kind of green, the colour water makes when it thinks about becoming metal under lamps. A handrail shows a run of nickel brightness along the top, where sleeves have polished it without trying. A brass tag on a gate lever reads, "Closed," in letters dulled by many thumbs. A click counter with a tiny glass window shows 000, a square of zeros so patient it looks like a face waiting for a joke it has heard before. A man in rubber boots sets his palm on the rail and taps twice, a habit, not a prayer. He doesn't wake the water, he keeps it company. He does not open the gate, he honours the shut. The river beyond the raceways holds itself flat and black, the way a road looks from a bus at 5 in the morning when every light has been flipped off in the world. In that room, counting will begin without a hand. In that room, the counter will speak once, and then, after a breath long enough to be heard, 11 more times, as if 12 silver bodies slid past through stillness. His cup will steam in a low cone and remind him he is a person. The number will remind him he is a witness. He will do what witnesses do: mark, compare, keep quiet where quiet is faithful. The desert watcher, halfway to the station again, doesn't need to know that to have done his part. But rooms at the edges of towns seem to know how to apprentice themselves across distance. Paper in one teaches water in another when to speak. Water teaches paper how to stop. Clocks teach counters. Counters teach clocks. A very small religion, if you want to call it that, and he doesn't. Moving north into his work, a steady figure with a thermos and a pocket full of seconds that behaved. Forks, Washington, late autumn 1977, 9:58 p.m. The raceways go quiet the way a field goes quiet after the last gate snaps. Sound pulled into wood, water smoothing its face. Long sheds lay soft rectangles of light across wet concrete and cedar posts. Beyond the chain link, the river keeps its own low breath, black and flat under alder limbs that lean like listening shoulders. His name is Earl Hendrickson, 45, grey at the temples, a night warden more by habit than title. The payroll form calls him watchman, but the locals say Warden Fitz. He's the one who never leaves until the counters line up. He's worked here 12 years, long enough to know which valves leak in winter, which lamps hum like sleep talkers, and which numbers lie when the water runs fast. There's a reason he notices tiny changes. Years back at the sawmill, he missed a pressure fault on a sleepy Sunday. No one died, but a man left with fewer fingers than he arrived with. Since then, Earl keeps pocket notebooks and checks what seems steady twice. He doesn't preach about it. He just listens harder when gauges look confident. He isn't married now. The house he rents up the hill holds 2 radios, 1 chair, and a shelf of old notebooks, one for every season the river stayed inside its banks. He's not lonely, just used to quiet that doesn't owe him anything. You could say he's a man trained to hear when something small falls out of rhythm. He likes the closing hour. Hose looped high, feed scoops nested belly to belly, every brass tag on the levers swung to the same word: closed. He taps the rail twice when a count feels right, once when it doesn't. Tonight he taps once and decides to earn the second. At the head of gate 3 sits the mechanical counter, small window, chrome shoulder, a comma-shaped scratch in the glass. He fogs it with a breath, wipes the smudge away, and lets the little square look like itself again. A clean 0 stares back at him, the kind that helps a room sit up straight. He walks row A heel then toe, counting boards because boards are easier than ours. The smell is the honest hatchery mix: wet cedar, last feed, a faint iron thread from a spigot that always drips and never rusts. A lamp hums the polite hum of a phone that's chosen not to ring. Back at the lever, he checks what hands can swear to. Padlock, cold and blunt. Hasp, seated. Tag, dull as old brass and therefore trustworthy. The spill lip is dry. He draws a crescent with the back of his glove, so morning will have something to believe besides him. The digits hold steady, 0 unchanged. He notes it once on the tally card because paper likes being in on the plan. He sets his thermos on the rail, seams east so the cup threads find themselves in the dark, and pours a careful inch. Steam makes a cone that holds until it folds. He doesn't drink yet. He listens the way a mechanic listens to idle. Chin down, mouth closed, half turned to the side. The shed answers in its old vocabulary: wood cooling, water resting, a moth testing glass and giving up. He glances down the lane to the rectangle of river. It looks back with the same indifferent face it uses for everything. Good weather, bad story, the same line. Go on then. He lets the indifference steady him. Does this kind of quiet feel honest to you, or like it's hiding something? He asks it softly, not expecting an answer. but it's fair to borrow if you're listening in the dark. He loops the small circle he makes when a night feels longer than it looks. Latch, meter box, broom head, valve, seam. The circle returns him to the rail the way stairs return you to a landing you already know. He presses the brass tag once, not to move it, to borrow its certainty, and lets go. Still 0. A last look before he should leave. He likes a number that keeps its posture when nobody's watching. He writes the plainest record a page will take. Row A, shut. 2158. Gate 3, locked. Counter, steady. Paper likes being in on the plan. He tucks the card away and finally drinks. The coffee's past flavour and still does its job. There's a reason he keeps this shift. And the night asks only for attention and steady hands. No politics, no witness, but water. You close what should be closed, count what should be counted, write the truth small, and give the hour back when it's finished with you. It's not peace exactly, but it's the shape of it. But it's... He takes the door bar and waits for the hinge to speak. It flexes, returns. The building is content to be what it is. Forks, 1977. Gate 3 closed, count steady. If you were on this rail, would you trust the 0? Not a test, just a way to measure what kind of night you're in. He should go. Boots to gravel, gravel to night, night to home. He pauses before the latch, giving the little window its last word. Faithful as a parking meter that doesn't care who you are. Mist drifts low along the fence. Alder leaves bead up like careful punctuation. He steps out, breath visible, palm still remembering the chill of the metal. On the path toward the office, he counts fence posts without meaning to, then stops before numbers turn superstitious. The ledger in his pocket warms against his chest, a small promise to tell the truth when asked. What do you think he expected to see? And what did he actually see? He expected routine. What he saw was a room willing to be believed, and that's enough to keep a man honest. He pictures the counter once more, just the little window, zeros sitting like good soldiers. If the night ever asked for a ladder, he thinks it would be tidy, not dramatic. A line you could read without raising your voice. He doesn't say it out loud. You don't teach a room tricks it hasn't learned on its own. He pockets the thought with the pencil and the card and lets the gravel carry him toward the low office window, where paper waits the way paper always waits, ready to keep whatever truth the next hour decides to hand over. 10:19 p.m. He comes back sooner than he needs to. He'll say later it was to check the east valves, but it's really the same reason men look at stoves twice. Quiet can be honest and still ask to be seen again. Mist has settled ankle high. The lamps have softened to a buttery yellow. He steps into the shed and takes the same measured path. Door, broom closet, row A, until the rail and the little window find him like they always do. The counter looks exactly as he left it. Calm, square, that first number holding like a well-made knot. He rests his palm on the rail and lets the metals chill, tell him the hour. A breath, another. The room keeps its posture. He begins the loop he trusts when thoughts want to get clever. Thermometer by the east wall, within range. Gate seal, clean. Padlock, cold as fact. Spill lip, still dry, his crescent. From earlier, a faint silver arc in the lamplight. He presses the brass closed tag with a fingertip, not to move it, only to borrow its conviction. When he looks back at the window, the number has changed. Just one digit, just one step, the slightest reordering of a machine's face. He doesn't blink, not right away. He lets the change sit on the surface of him like a leaf, then sink. He has a practiced way of not rushing the mind to meaning. List first, feeling later. Lever locked. Hasp seated. Tag still closed. Lip dry. No one in the room but him. He opens his pocket notebook and writes the smallest line he can live with. Counter, advanced 1, gate, closed. He says the time aloud so the room can hear him agree with the page. He doesn't touch the button. Instead, he sets 3 tiny witnesses, a habit he learned after the sawmill. Sunday he won't repeat. A sliver of ledger paper, times scribbled on its corner, nested under the counter's base where anyone can see it later. A stub of chalk laid lengthwise, close but not touching. A matchstick propped gently against the metal foot. None of them will stop anything. All of them will tell him if he imagined it. He pours a half-inch of coffee and doesn't drink. The steam makes a small tent that could shelter a moth. He watches the tent collapse and tries on the cleanest explanations. A spring easing, heat and cool setting different teeth. The building exhaling at the right moment. Each thought has angles that refuse to square with the others. Across the shed, a rafter sighs the way an old board does when night air enters it. The sound is not about water. It is about wood remembering its shape. He lets it pass without giving it a job. Minutes go by. He allows his attention to widen. Rail, window, door, seam. The slow shine of lamp on concrete. When his eyes come back to the counter again, the number has eased forward once more. No sound, no stutter. The change feels less like motion and more like a decision. He sets the cup down, surprised to hear the tiniest ring when it touches the post. Funny how a small sound can confirm you're awake. He returns to the list, revises nothing, underlines nothing. If a number turned with no hand on it, what would you check first? The lock, the lip, or the air? He sends the question to the room as a courtesy. Anyone listening in the dark can borrow it. He gives his hands honest work to keep them from inventing tests. He wipes condensation off the valve housing with slow strokes that don't change anything. He oils the hinge on the access door until it stops squeaking in his head. He brushes a line of grit from the seam of the floor into the small pan he keeps hooked on a nail. Small tasks are a fence that keeps the mind from running. When he looks up again, the counter has moved a 3rd time. He feels the change land not as fear, but as focus. The part of the body that lives between shoulder and spine lining up like type in a chase. He takes off his gloves and lays them on the rail. Bare skin meets cool metal, then warmer metal where the lamp has done its slow work. If the casing holds any heat of its own, it isn't telling. He leans closer, studying the comma-shaped scratch in the glass. The scratch divides his reflection into 2 thin versions of himself, one doubtful, one steady. He decides to be the steady one. He moves to the chain link and looks through the dark rectangle at the river. The moon has lifted, turning the surface to sheet metal. For a moment, the sheen fractures into 100 soft coins, then smooths again. Nothing in that face asks for blame or credit. It simply carries. Back at the rail, he writes 3 longer lines in the notebook. Careful script, no adornment. Counter advanced again without input. Intervals irregular but patient. Room behavior ordinary. Seals intact. No vibration. He reads the sentences once, satisfied and a little bored by their honesty, which is the correct feeling. Boredom is what you want near anomalies. It keeps drama small enough to fit on paper. More minutes. The air shifts from river cold to cedar warm and back. Somewhere, a moth finds the lamp again and tests its glass with soft insistence. The number changes a 4th time. He lets himself smile, just enough to admit the wonder without inviting it to climb onto the rail. "All right," he says to the counter, as if to a good dog that finally sat. "I see you." He does not count aloud. He does not whisper to make anything happen. He simply stands and lets the pace become the room's. Long pause, small change, long pause. Between each, he checks the witnesses. The chalk hasn't rolled, the matchstick leans a hair more toward the foot, but hasn't toppled. The paper sliver still shows its time like a tongue. Children stick out to prove a point. He takes a slow walk outside, not to abandon the moment, but to stretch it. Gravel gives under his boots like low thunder no one will ever write down. A heron stands at the far bend, prehistoric and unembarrassed. It lifts one leg with the ceremony of a metronome and sets it down in the exact place the leg expected to be. He takes comfort from that. Even Grace keeps a ledger. When he comes back in, the counter holds the new number as if it had always been there. He eases onto the stool by the valve box and lets his shoulders drop. This will be the hour then, not a storm, not a break, not a man's mistake. Just a small machine, remembering in public. He writes a promise to his future self at the bottom of the page. Stay until the pattern stops, change nothing. He underlines nothing once. That is the whole craft of the night. Knowing when to touch and when to keep your hands in your pockets. He finally drinks the coffee. It has gone flat and useful. The heat meets his jaw and persuades it to unclench. He watches the counter through the small drift of steam and thinks of the sawmill man's hand, of the way one missing piece can teach another to be careful for years. He is careful now. He lets the carefulness be his only explanation. Another advance, slower this time. He feels it more than sees it, a patience arriving at the end of itself. He glances at the door seam and the spill lip, and the tag that still says closed, like a neighbor who doesn't gossip. The world remains ordinary around the oddness, which is the most unnerving part, that the room refuses to help him choose a story. Would you stay and watch, or write it down and leave it for morning? He asks it, half to you, half to his own better angels. He stays. He copies the current reading onto a fresh strip and tucks it with the first. He squares the chalk. He straightens the matchstick with a nail's head touch. He checks his own posture and finds it has become the posture of a witness, a person who will not be able to say later that he looked away. The minutes thin. The counter settles for a while as if to rest. He lets the quiet be exactly itself. He turns off the far lamps one by one until only the pool over gate 3 remains, a green coin anchoring the scene. If anything more wants to happen, it will find him here, unbusy, available, and kind. He stands long enough to feel the building's weight transfer to the cooler ground. The river's breath resume its low syllable, the ledger in his pocket soften with the heat of his side. If a machine is going to remember one step at a time, he decides, a man can remember alongside it, no louder, no faster, and with as little opinion as paper. When the next change finally comes, it is slower than the last, and lands like the end of a sentence. No flourish, just the quiet shape of done, for now. He doesn't check his watch, he doesn't bless the moment. He simply writes the new number, closes the notebook, and rests his hand flat on the rail until the metal and the bone agree on the hour. At 10:47 p.m. he gives the room a little distance, 3 slow steps back, until the lamp's green coin sits whole on the rail and the counter's window. From here, everything arranges itself into a diagram he trusts. Lever, tag, lock, spill lip, digits. Nothing dramatic, only parts agreeing to be parts. The counter moves again, unhurried, self-possessed. He doesn't chase it with his eyes. He lets the change arrive and settle, the way you let a fact finish its sentence before you answer. The new number wears the same calm the last one did. He writes it once, small, then closes the notebook so the page can cool. He's aware of his posture now, shoulders down, hands light, jaw easy. This is the shape his body takes when the world decides to speak quietly. He keeps it. The matchstick leans a fraction more toward the counter's foot, but doesn't fall. The chalk stays still. The paper sliver under the base shows its penciled time like a neat little flag. He makes himself do a practical thing. He kneels and checks the bracket bolts on the rail, one knuckle to each head. Tight. He checks the seam in the floor where grit likes to gather and sweeps a single line into the pan. No theatrics, only ordinary proof that will sound right when repeated to a morning man over coffee. Another change, slower, as if the machine has learned his pace and decided to keep it. He doesn't mark the interval. He isn't collecting ammunition, he's keeping company. He notes the new reading and draws a small square around it. Not a box of emphasis, just a corner to keep the eye from sliding past it later. He steps to the chain link and looks out at the river. The moon has climbed and thinned. The white seam on the water has narrowed into a lane of pewter. Somewhere far upstream, something heavy rolls, probably a log turning in a slow eddy, and the sound arrives as a suggestion rather than a fact. He lets the suggestion be itself and returns to the rail. The counter has advanced again. If there's a rhythm, it's not a metronome, more like breath, long, patient, with a mind of its own. He thinks of the 12 from last year, but doesn't invite that number into this room. Different night, different story. He's learned not to braid two truths into one rope unless he's planning to pull something. He leans a forearm on the rail and lets the nickel drag tell him temperature. The casing feels like metal that has been under a lamp, nothing more. He puts two fingertips lightly against the chrome shoulder, not pressing, just learning the texture, so that if he ever needs to swear later about what he did not do, his skin can help his mouth. Which detail convinces you most? The locked hasp, the dry spill lip, or the way the room holds its breath? He asks it softly and keeps it for whoever needs a place to stand. The number turns again. He feels it in his back before he sees it, a small aligning sensation like a level finding true. He writes, advanced, gate closed, and closes the book. The words look almost bored, which is good. He wants this to sound like inventory, not testimony. He lets himself stand still long enough to hear other small lives, mice beyond the wall discovering a crumb, swallows shifting in the rafters, a moth drumming the lamp with less hope each time. The building makes a long timber note that has nothing to do with water and everything to do with night air. Ordinary. All of it ordinary. The oddness lives in a neat window on a rail. He pours a finger of coffee and finally drinks. The heat opens a passage behind his nose and returns cedar and iron to him in the right order. He catches himself counting breaths and stops. You don't herd a minute, you recognize it when it arrives. Another turn. He does the math inside his head, quiet arithmetic that doesn't want to be overheard. If the machine is carrying a tune, it's one only the room can hum along with. He glances at his tiny witnesses, the chalk, still a white bone, the matchstick, a courteous lean, the paper sliver honest as paper ever is. Good. He sits on the low stool beside the valve box, and because hands like a task while eyes keep watch, he takes a rag and rubs the brass tag until the word closed shows one shade brighter. Not for beauty, for certainty. The tag finishes shining and returns to dull the way brass does when it remembers its station. He sets the rag aside and looks back at the window. Another advance. He almost laughs, not at the machine, at the politeness of it. If there were malice here, it would have made a point already. This feels like a record being kept for someone who knows how to read it. Maybe that someone is him. Maybe it's just the room. He writes a single line for his future self. Pattern steady, interval stretch, mood calm. He smiles at mood, scratches it out, replaces it with room calm. Papers don't deserve moods. Rooms sometimes do. The heron outside takes one step, then refolds itself. The moon lifts a finger's width. A far truck drops from third to second on the grade and disappears behind trees. None of those things matter, and all of them matter, because they prove this is a world where lots of small truths coexist without asking one another's permission. Another change, unmistakable now, the number rolling over with the same tidy assurance as before. He doesn't count aloud, he doesn't fixate on the total. He simply notes the new face and lets the old one go, the way you would let a page turn when it insists. If he told you this over coffee, would you believe him? Why or why not? He gives the question to the quiet. It lands without echo and stays exactly the size it should. Time thins. He turns off 2 more aisle lamps, leaving only the green coin above gate 3. The room becomes smaller and more honest, like a kitchen after the guests have gone. If anything more is coming, it will come in this smaller space. When the next advance arrives, it comes so slowly it almost looks like hesitation. He's aware of his own muscles answering with the same patience, refusing to rush what doesn't want to be rushed. The digits complete their small journey and rest. He writes it down. He doesn't underline. He doesn't even dot the I in advance with more force than usual. He has learned that tidy penmanship is a kind of science. He steps outside the door for a breath, holding it open with his boot so the hinge doesn't speak. The river has changed its voice, not louder, not faster, just a touch nearer, as if the night had moved the fence an inch. Fog threads the alders, beading on the wire. He rests his shoulder to the jamb and lets the damp find the cuffs of his jacket. When he goes back in, the counter has not moved. Good. The world is not a show. He tidies his witnesses, re-square the chalk, reset the matchstick, slide the paper sliver a hair deeper so it won't flutter if the door breathes. He checks the bracket bolts again, not because bolts loosen in an hour, but because doing so anchors him to labor and not to wonder. The next turn is slower again. He recognizes the feeling now, the machine growing thoughtful, as if approaching a number it cares about. He doesn't supply the number. He remembers the sawmill Sunday and refuses to bless guesses with his mouth. He only writes and breathes. There is a point where waiting stops being an action and becomes a place. He reaches it. In that place, the room's separate parts, lamp, water, rail, window, man, share a single tempo. He doesn't name it. Names break things that don't want to be broken. When the change finally comes, it lands with the small satisfaction of a drawer closing true. He looks at what the window now says and allows himself one quiet nod, the sort you give a child who has learned a complicated shoe knot without being taught. He writes the total, folds the notebook closed and sets it beside the thermos. He rests both palms flat on the rail. The metal has decided to be cool again. He waits long enough to make sure the number means to stay. It stays. He wants to take a photograph and doesn't. Not yet. The moment doesn't want a camera. It wants to be left as found for a while longer. He honors that. What do you think this number really measures? He asks the only question worth asking, and accepts that he won't get an answer. He draws one thin line at the bottom of the page he's already used, a little horizon to hold the hour in place, and writes beneath it, small, remain, change nothing. Then he sits, folds his hands, and gives the room the one thing it asked for at the start of the night, attention that doesn't show off. 11:12 p.m. He decides to do the simple thing that looks like doing nothing. He sits again, palms down on the rail, until bone and metal learn each other's temperature. and lets the room finish any sentence it was in the middle of. The counter holds steady. The lamp holds its green coin. The river keeps its low syllable pressed flat against the chain link, as if language worked better when it touched wire. He opens the notebook only to the line he left himself remain, change nothing, and reads it as if someone else wrote it. That makes it easier to obey. He puts the book face down, spine parallel to the rail, a quiet geometry he trusts in places where measurements matter more than opinions. After a minute, he lets his eyes rest on the little witnesses he set earlier. The chalk is the same white bone, squared. The paper sliver still shows its penciled time like a schoolboy's neat answer. The matchstick leans, courteous, unrevised. He gives each a tiny nod he doesn't waste words on. Agreement is its own small food. The counter turns again. No click, no throat clear, just the number maturing into a different version of itself. He writes the new face on a scrap and tucks it with the others. He does not count totals. He lets totals be a morning man's job, a sunlight thing. Night work is smaller, sequences, positions, what belonged where and whether it stayed. He checks the padlock by habit, even though habit has nothing left to prove. Still cold. He checks the hasp. Seated. He puts a knuckle under the spill lip and touches the metal like a person would touch a horse's neck. Not to persuade, only to know what warm means right now. It's the simple chill of air under a lamp. No thread of water, no film. He draws another faint crescent with the back of his glove. The first arc has blurred to a single silver line. That's what time does to proof. It asks you to make more. He gives himself one permissible test. He takes a thin carpenter's pencil from his pocket, the kind that makes a flat mark, and scores a hairline across the counter's chrome shoulder and onto the fixed bracket behind it. Not deep, not vandalism, just a registration mark the eye can read without number. If anything shifts that isn't supposed to shift, the line will break its own spine. He steps back. The pencil line looks almost imaginary until you know to look for it. Good. That's its job. Which kind of proof do you trust more? The kind you can feel with your hand, or the kind a line tells you without speaking? He leaves the question out like a dish of water for a dog that might come by. Minutes stretch. The machine waits like a careful clerk. Far outside, a night truck moves through gears on the grade. Third to second, a small vow to gravity, then gone. The heron remakes itself into stillness. The building sighs a timber note from a place he can point to with his ears. Ordinary. He lets ordinary be the room's majority vote. The number rolls one more time, patient, polite, something like breath finding the bottom of a chest. He writes it down with a penmanship that makes its own argument. This is not a performance. He closes the book and sets the pencil parallel to the spine. He doesn't notice he's smiling until the muscles remind him. It isn't delight. It's recognition. Some nights deserve witnesses with good posture. He reaches for the thermos and pauses. His hand hangs over the cup, then retreats an inch without meaning to. He has a way with his gear, a way he never had to explain to anyone because no one else closes this room at this hour. He always sets the seam east. Threads find themselves in the dark if you respect direction. It's a habit as steady as tapping the rail when a count feels right. The seam is not east. It points a few degrees north, just enough for the light to find the ridge and declare it. Nothing dramatic. No drag marks, no cup half unscrewed. Only a witness that happens to be a cylinder telling him it remembers a different hand than his. He doesn't move for the space of 3 breaths. He doesn't let his face decide anything. He lets the surprise sit like a small animal in the middle of the floor and see whether it wants to run. Is this the kind of thing a tired man misremembers, or the kind of thing a hand changes without asking permission? He gives himself both options because both are kind. He does the right kind of unexciting work. He kneels and looks for disturbance where disturbance likes to announce itself badly, the grit line along the floor seam, the dust that settles in the fold of the hasp, the spider web that triangulates the lower rail to the leg and the concrete. The grit still lies in a rope he dragged into the pan an hour ago. The hasp dust holds its soft ridge. The tiny web makes its little chalk geometry unbroken. He leans closer and finds one thing only: a single pale alder seed stuck in the spider silk, caught like a star in a weak constellation. He didn't bring that in with his boots. The web did its own work and gathered what the night offered. That is not a human clue. That is a night clue. He files it mentally under weather, not under story. He stands and looks at the thermos seam again. He tries on the tired man answer. He turns the idea in his head until it either fits or doesn't. It doesn't. He is not the sort who performs habits for show. He is the sort who makes a habit to avoid that part of the mind that wants to skip. He would have set the seam east. He knows the feeling in his palm of east. His hand and the cup have an agreement. He does not touch it. He draws a very small compass rose on the rail with the carpenter pencil, N-E-S-W, so faint the letters almost don't qualify as letters. He sets the pencil down on S, a joke for later that only he will enjoy if this becomes a story at all. He takes the smallest step back the body can take without tumbling, a concession to respect. The counter's digits move again, sooner than he expected this time, and with the same lack of theatre. He reaches nothing. He says nothing. He lets the number finish becoming what it wants to be. When it rests, he walks the short distance to the chain link. The river shows him its patient pewter lane. He puts his fingers into the wire's diamond and feels its night cold, as if the room needed him to borrow some of the fence's indifference. What would you do if the only human sign in the room was a cup that forgot its direction? He gives it softly, the way you'd hand someone a key without telling them what door it fits. He returns to the rail and addresses the simpler parts. He checks the bracket bolts, tight. He checks the registration scratch across the chrome and the mount, unbroken. He checks the chalk, the matchstick, the paper, loyal as always. If a person moved anything, it was the thing he owns and did not lock, the cup, whose seam points wrong like a polite finger. He considers calling the office. He pictures the single lamp over the dispatcher's desk and the way conversation would make the oddness bigger than it is. He pictures a morning man's laugh, kindly or not. He keeps the phone on its hook. Night deserves the courtesy of being addressed in its own language first. He gives himself another permissible test. He takes the thermos very gently in both hands, thumb and finger, on the knurled cup, not the body, and turns it until the seam meets his pencil, E. He sets it down exactly where it was. He makes no speech. He watches it the way he's been watching the counter, like a patient uncle watching a child who might want to show a trick unprompted. He waits. Minutes are a place again. He walks them like a perimeter. He listens to the swallows rearrange complaint into sleep. He hears a mouse reshape paper into house somewhere in the wall. He watches the green coin of light keep water from pretending to be anything but water when it meets the rail. The counter delays, then turns. He writes it. He doesn't look at totals. He doesn't even look at his line of scraps. He only looks, now and then, at the cup. The seam remains east. He lets out a breath he didn't ask for. Not relief, confirmation. Whatever moved before is not moving now, or not that way. He refuses to make a noun out of it. That's how mistakes are born. Naming a thing too early and then having to carry the name around. He takes the rag and brightens the brass tag again for no good reason beyond the way certainty likes to be handled. Closed looks one shade clearer. He watches it dull. He sets the rag down. He finds that his shoulders have forgotten to creep toward his ears. He reminds them with a shrug that looks exactly like a man with a small chill, where they belong. The counter moves again, almost lazily. He writes the new face and adds a line he will not scratch out. Room unchanged, one human sign not repeated. He underlines nothing. He reads the sentence with the same neutrality he'd give to a line about feed weight or hose length. He lets his voice try it on in his head, the way it will sound to the morning man. It sounds like a thing a person can stand near without having to hold their breath. He looks once more at the open door seam. He has left the door braced with his boot before. This time it stands closed. The hinge gave its comment hours ago and has since gone back to being hardware. He looks at the screws holding its leaf to the post. No shine where a driver would have slipped, no shiver of wood. He puts that non-fact on the same invisible shelf as so much that did not change tonight. Negative proof is still proof, even if it doesn't photograph well. He tucks the notebook into his pocket. The ledger rides warm against his shirt. He looks at the rail, the lamp, the window, each a citizen of the room with the rights and duties of its station. He sets his hand on the counter's chrome shoulder with two fingertips, light as a moth landing and thinking better of it. He lifts his hand away. He leaves no smudge. The comma-shaped scratch divides his reflection into the same two thin men. He remains the steady one. Would you tell someone? Or would you let the night keep its small difference and see if it returns? He asks it as if both answers are honourable, because they are. He turns one aisle lamp off and leaves the green coin. The shed shrinks to the size of the one conversation it's having. He stands in it the way a person stands at a window when they're not waiting for anyone, just learning what the dark looks like when it isn't pretending to be anything else. When the next advance arrives, he feels it like the end of a paragraph, a place where a reader could stop and the story would hold. He writes the number. He taps the rail once, not because the count feels wrong, but because the night does a little. He earns the second tap by doing nothing else. He leaves the cup's seam east. He leaves the chalk squared. He leaves the matchstick leaning in a posture that understands patience. He leaves the paper sliver where a morning eye can find it. He leaves the pencil compass on the rail, faint enough to pass as grain if you don't know to look. He rests his palm flat one more time until the cool becomes a fact and not a sensation. The room gives him back what it always has. Forks, 1977, Gate 3 closed, count steady, and one small addition that will travel with him whether he writes it down or not. A thermos that remembered North once, when no one should have asked it to, for 11:31 p.m. He decides the room has had his full attention and earned a little space. The counter's new face holds, the cup's seam stays east, the witnesses keep their manners. He eases off the stool, smooths the rag once across the brass tag out of habit rather than need, and lets his boots find the familiar rhythm toward the office. Short stride, heel soft, toe softer, so the building doesn't mistake him for weather. Mist has thickened to a low tide over the gravel. Alder beads look like punctuation deciding where to sit. He passes the chain link and reads the river without asking it for an opinion. The grade truck is long gone. The road has given the night back to things that don't use gas. His breath makes a small white ledger in front of him that keeps time and then files itself. The office window shows him the same square of dark he trusts. Metal desk, lamp neck like a patient swan, the calendar in its place, the punch clock's mouth closed. He tries the knob, more out of courtesy than caution. It turns the way it always does when only a night warden asks it. Inside, the air has the plain smell of paper, pencil, and a little oil where the door hinge keeps its own diary. He snaps the lamp once. Low. The shade makes a circle that would fit a dinner plate and pours it neatly over ledger and blotter. He stands a second and lets the room remember what he looks like. Nothing scurries. Nothing announces. He sets his notebook down and opens it to the last line, room unchanged, one human sign not repeated, and leaves it there as if the page has a right to see where it's quoted. He does his small inventory. Wall clock, slow by a minute as usual, he knows its lie and forgives it. Window latch, flat. Drawer faces, flush. The typewriter wears its brown cover like a modest coat. The cord makes the same lazy S he left it in. On the peg by the door, the spare gate keys sit with their insulted silence. On the desk corner rests the office pencil mug, one glass jelly jar with a chip like Idaho. He glances in, a dozen stubs, his kind of mix, Gnome 2s, bitten blunt by time, a red-blue editor, a carpenter flat, one thick grease pencil for tags that fight back. The grease pencil is sharper than he left it. Not new, not factory, just too clean at the nose, the paper wrapper torn an inch lower than his memory says. He is not a man whose memory fights for the marquee, it fights for the margin. He knows the feel of that stub when he last used it to darken closed on a tag with old brass that had lost its nerve. The point then was a tired bullet. The point now has an angle like a plan. He turns the jar a quarter inch and watches the wrappers settle. No curl of shavings in the jar, none in the ashtray, none on the blotter where such mess would show as a tiny, rough moon. He doesn't straighten his back. He lets the noticing pass through him and stick by itself if it wants to. He hears himself say in the good, neutral voice he uses when another man's morning is coming, "Grease pencil sharper than left." He does not add by whom. He makes no noun out of a verb. Would you count that as proof or as weather inside an office? He lets the question sit with the stapler and the stamp pad, two other tools that never ask to be believed. He does the old habit that keeps a man from making up extra, touch and compare. He puts two fingers on the desk's cold lip, where his palm reminds him it always finds anchor, then lifts and looks for oil. The wood gives him back only dust, and that faint smell of older paper where ledgers go when they die. He leans and inspects the punch clock slots on the wall, wooden slats, numbers stamped in black. Cards live here, mouths up, spines down, a vertical town that never argues. His own card wears the number he's had for years, the same 3 digits he could write in the dark. It usually sits in slot 24, third row, right-hand side, a place his fingers reach without needing to see. It sits in slot 23, no crease, no dog ear, just a card living one door over from its address, polite and obviously wrong to anyone who knows him, invisible to anyone who does not. He doesn't move it back. He takes the edge between his fingers and raises it a quarter inch, looking for the shadow line dust draws when something migrates. Dust shows nothing useful. He sets the card home in 23 again, on purpose now, like marking a value in a column and leaving it there so the next line will know where to start. If a thing is wrong by 1, do you fix it, or do you learn what else in the room wants to be off by 1? He offers it to the wood, which gives him exactly the reply wood always gives. He sits, chair not pulled, chair not squeaking, chair exactly where the shadow of its front leg says it lives. He writes 3 lines because writing refits the bones of a moment to a thing paper understands. Office, entered, 2331, secure, Grease pencil nose new, no shavings visible. Time card, 117 in slot 23, not 24, left as is. He looks at his hand to see if it trembles. It doesn't. What trembles is something you can't see without a mirror. The place in a person where old mistakes store themselves like winter wood. He breathes once, twice, and the place settles. He turns off the lamp and leaves the page open in the circle's afterglow to watch the ink dry. Back outside, the mist has climbed to calf. He takes the path upslope toward the higher raceways, the ones that keep colder water and a different tone. Gravel underfoot reports him to nobody. Ferns return to being ferns after his ankle brushes them. A short distance ahead, another shed door faces him with the same blank patience as a barn with good manners. He opens and steps into a smaller version of the first room, half the bays, same language. Light lands on wet concrete like someone laid coins for a child to count slowly. He does the loop because loops are honest. Valves, levers, tags, lip. Closed, closed, closed. The spill lips here are leaner, edges newer than the old building's wide, familiar mouth. He sketches a crescent on one lip with his glove, habit, not suspicion. It shows well. His eye finds another human thing, because his eye is trained that way. The feed scoops on the wall hang to a hook, bellies nested, handles east to keep folks from bumping them. He notices one pair at the far end belly out, as if someone in a hurry washed, hung, and let gravity decide it's not a sin, it's a style, it isn't his. He leaves them belly out. If a thing wants to declare itself, you don't tidy it out of its own sentence. The little mechanical counter at gate 5 sits with its face to the room, unassertive, a cousin of the first. He fogs the glass with a quiet breath and wipes it, because belief ought to start with seeing. Zero looks back, a true zero, the kind you could balance a rule on. He sets the same 3 witnesses he trusts now, like tools he's paid off. Paper sliver, chalk bone, matchstick lean. He draws the faintest pencil line where chrome meets bracket. The little compass rose on the first rail stays in his mind like a picture pinned in a locker. He doesn't redraw it here. A man can carry one joke at a time. He stands and lets the room choose whether it wants to perform. It does not. Wood speaks once and then keeps its counsel. Water breathes the same syllable. Somewhere under the roof, a swallow edits its nest by feel. He waits long enough to be sure waiting is an action here and not a costume. He listens for the big office clock's tone through 2 walls and doesn't hear it. He does the math on his own. 6 minutes since the lamp, 10 since the card, 12 since the counter last turned in the other shed. He feels the ledger at his chest warm against him, a small domestic comfort no one else is invited to have. Which of these matters to you more, the counter that behaves or the tools that remember someone else's hand? He keeps his voice small inside his head. The room is not a place for raised anything. He gives the upper shed what he promised the first, attention without opinion. And when it gives him nothing in return, he counts that as something. He switches the light off and lets the dark fold back where it prefers to live. Mist sidles in at the threshold and makes a soft claim to the floor. Downslope again, the first shed shows its single green coin like a lighthouse scaled for rooms. He opens the door and lets the hinge talk once out of gratitude. Then quiet. He goes to the rail the way you go to a chair you've already broken in. The counter has not moved. He reads that as a sentence with a period. He touches the chrome shoulder with 2 fingers and lets the comma-shaped scratch split him into doubtful and steady again. The steady man leans an inch just to check the witnesses. Chalk squared, matchstick attentive without ambition, paper's tongue showing the first time he tucked, all faithful. He turns to the thermos not because it's guilty, but because it lately joined the cast. The seam stays east, small ridge throwing its neat shadow over the pencil, N he drew earlier. He rests his hand on the cup and rotates it a breath's width. Threads give that soft, known start, the kind that tells you you're touching an agreement, not an argument. He tightens again and returns the seam to E. He takes a sip. Heat does the jaw-loosening work he pays it for. He sets the cup down and notices, because noticing has made a life out of him, that the pencil compass he drew on the rail has changed character. Not gone, not smudged by sleeve. The N looks the same, the S looks the same, the tiny E and W still pretend to be grain. What's different is weight. The E is a hair darker than it was, as if the graphite accepted a second pass from a hand that knew to trace light and not to leave a ridge. He did not make that second pass. He does not put his finger on the letter to check the smear. He keeps his hands in his pockets where he told them to stay an hour ago. He looks at the letter long enough for the picture to fix in the part of the brain that stores doorways and white lines and the way your father stood when he was done speaking. Then he lifts his eyes to the counter's window and the green coin of the lamp above it. Would you wake someone for this? He asks it the way a man asks the dark if the house is really on fire or just learning how to creak. He writes 2 lines, small and exact. Returned 2344. Gate 3 witnesses unchanged, counter static. Office and upper shed note, small human differences, left intact. He closes the book and rests his hand flat on the rail until the bone learns the metal again. The room holds its breath at a normal length. Outside, the river keeps its lane of pewter like it was told. Inside, a faint, polite sound happens that he feels before he hears the tiniest bump of something wooden against wood from the office side. Not a knock, not a drop. A sound like a pencil settling in its jar after the jar has already been set down. He keeps his eyes on the counter's window and does not turn. He gives the sound the same courtesy he's given everything else tonight, room to speak if it has something to say. 11:58 p.m. He decides the sound in the office, small, wooden, politely certain, deserves being met without hurry. He leaves the shed as if stepping out of a chapel after a prayer he can't remember the words to, pulls the door until the hinge gives its one clear sentence, and walks the misted path up to the office with the river's pewter breath, keeping pace on his left. Inside, the lamp makes its dinner plate circle again. Nothing is tipped, nothing is wrong in the way mornings like to write down. He gives the room time to reveal what it means by that sound. It doesn't. Most rooms don't. He goes to the desk. The jar of pencils sits where he left it. He can tell because the chip, like Idaho, still throws its familiar crescent of shadow across the blotter. He looks into the glass. The grease pencil, the too clean nose he noted, has rolled a quarter turn. The torn paper wrapper shows one more letter than before, as if someone pronounced the same name more clearly the second time. There's still no shaving curl anywhere, no dust disturbed. Only a tool repeating what it already said, but slower. He lifts his gaze to the punch clock slots. His card remains in 23, not 24. He leaves it. Learned once, the night deserves to keep its own math long enough to finish. He sits and writes the smallest words that still count. Office sound. Pencil jar unchanged in place. One stub rotated. Time card still one off. No other disturbance. He dots nothing with force. He draws no box. He lets the ink shrink into the paper until it looks like it was always there. Back in the first shed, the green coin over gate 3 waits like a patient witness who will neither coax nor scold. He lays his palm on the rail and feels cool agree with bone. He looks at his faint compass rose on the rail, N-E-S-W, and knows what he knows. The E is still a shade darker than the others. He draws his fingertip over air above it without touching, the way a person might trace a name that belongs to someone else. He takes the cup, drinks and sets it down with the seam east, the way his hands believe in. The counter's digits keep their face. He checks the 3 tiny witnesses, paper tongue visible, chalk bone squared, matchstick leaning with its mild courtesy. He waits long enough for waiting to be a statement and not a hope. The number begins to turn, slower than any prior turn, so slow a mind could imagine the machine unlearning its own teeth. He doesn't lean. He doesn't blink at it. He chooses the posture of trust, because that's the only posture he owns that fits this room. The digit completes itself like a drawer closing true. He writes it once in the notebook. He adds one other line he's earned. Pace suggests end of cycle. Would you call that an ending or a pause that knows its own length? He lets the question pass through him and rest on the rail like a moth that understands glass. He turns off the aisle lamps until only the green coin remains. The building grows small and exact, trimmed to the size of what it means. Outside, the river presses its syllable against the chain link. Inside, nothing asks to be more dramatic than it is. He finds the stool with the back of his legs and doesn't sit. He stands, both hands on the rail, and lets the night decide if it has one more motion in it. It gives him one, not in the digits, not in the valve tags, not in the air. In the quiet pencil letters on the rail, the tiny E, darker by a hair from some earlier pass, carries a new thread of graphite just to its right, a ghost line parallel to the letter's spine, thin as a river spider's leg, the kind of mark that happens when a pencil lifts and returns a breath, later on almost the same track. Not smudged, not heavy. A second thought beside the first. He didn't make it. He knows how his hand lifts. This is a different lift. He feels a memory asked to be helpful, the sawmill. Sunday, the pressure fault, the way an almost can ruin a hand. He does what that memory trained him to do. He changes nothing. He writes what the room can live with in daylight. Compass mark shows second trace at E, not mine. Witnesses steady, gate shut, counter static. He closes the book as if closing a lid on a loaf that needs to finish by its own heat. He breathes, the room breathes back, cedar and iron in the right order. No malice announces itself, no performance either, only a ledger being kept by more than one hand. He lifts the padlock and feels its weight settle like a familiar dog. He seats it again. He presses the brass closed tag until its dullness warms under his thumb and gives back a shade of shine. He looks toward the chain link where fog has threaded the diamonds and gathered in milky beads like sentences stopping at commas. What do you want him to do with this? Tell it or hold it? He asks it, not to the room, but to you, knowing you weren't here, trusting you anyway. He walks to the office a last time, not to chase anything down, but to leave the house in order. The lamp, one click. The ledger, squared to the desk's edge. The pencil jar, glass pushed, until the Idaho chip's shadow matches the stain it always matches. The punch clock's mouth still closed, the card still one slot off. He does not put it back. Truth belongs where it was found, not where it would look better. He fills the nightly report with the same handwriting he's used for a decade, steady loops, patient stems. He writes the unexciting parts first, because that's how trust is earned. Row A shut at 21:58, gate 3 locked and observed, Gate 3 counter advanced intermittently without input. Seals and lips dry. Room behavior ordinary. Witnesses set and unchanged. Office pencil rotated. Grease pencil nose new. Time card 117 found slot 23. Upper shed. No movement at counters. Feed scoops 1 pair belly out. Left as is. He stops not because he's finished, but because he knows the size a page should be when a man reads it over coffee and decides whether to trust the one who wrote it. He adds 1 line small, hardly bigger than breath. Compass E shows second light trace. Thermos seam once off east, returned. He signs his name in the way people sign at the end of days that did not ask to be heroic. He leaves the report on the corner where morning men reach first. On the way out, he lets the main door speak and answer itself, open, close, and then pauses with his hand on the bar, listening if the building has a last remark it wanted to save for last. It doesn't. Buildings rarely do. He steps into the mist. Gravel receives him like an old ledger receiving a new entry and makes no judgment about it. At the gate, he stops and looks back, because looking back is the courtesy a knight gives to a man who has watched it with his whole attention. The green coin over gate 3 holds. The river's lane keeps its pewter. The office window is a square of dim patience. He thinks of the numbers that turned and the ones that stayed, the tools that remembered someone else's hand, the tiny E that learned a second line it didn't need to learn to be itself. If you were on this rail, would you trust the zero? And if the zero learned to move without you, would you trust yourself? He leaves those two on the fence like tags on a hook for morning. He walks the hill to his rented house. Inside are the 2 radios, the 1 chair, the shelf of notebooks, 1 for every season. The river kept its banks. He'll open a new one for this month. He will write in it only what a pencil can carry without breaking. He will change nothing that was left on purpose. He will tell no one who wants fireworks the story of a number that moved politely and a room that remembered north when no one asked it to. At his door, he finds the porch bulb holding steady. No buzz, no flicker. He puts his palm on the wood, then the latch. Metal gives back the night's same temperature, as if to say that truth, like weather, doesn't owe a reason to be believed. Behind him, the river speaks a last soft line that could belong to any hour. In front of him, the house admits him without opinion. The ledger rides warm against his chest. He hangs his jacket on its nail, and before he sits, writes 1 sentence on a clean page to end the night at the size it deserves. Gate 3 kept its posture when watched. The room kept a second set of hands. I'm glad you stayed with me tonight. Forks in late autumn, a room that kept its posture, and a counter that learned to move politely. Before we go, help me build the night map. Drop your city and local time in the comments, and add what you're listening on, phone, TV, car, or earbuds, so our quiet line can circle the world. Tell me what details stuck with you, the cup seam that remembered north once, the time card 1 slot off, or that faint extra line on E. Keep it kind and steady. Small, human clues are what we keep here. New, calm history horror arrives most nights. If this kept you company, wait until the video ends to subscribe, then tap the bell so the next file finds you at the right hour. Shares help the right people find the quiet. Thank you for that. I'll leave 1 pocket rule. Start with the record. Keep faith with the ordinary. I'll straighten the notebook, center the cup, and leave the room how I found it. Lights low, story filed, latch kept. Good night.